So, Russ, we've been off for a week, and I knew what recordings we were going to listen to 2 weeks ago. So I figured, okay, I'll listen to them all, and I'll have a week off. But wouldn't you know it, I just finished listening to the last of the 6 recordings a few hours ago. I'm telling you, if we did this podcast once a year and we had 6 recordings to listen to, I'd finish them like next year, like right before the podcast somehow. I don't know why that happens.
I don't know. It's something about life. You always sort of automatically measure things out when you have extra time. And then you never really account for getting things done early. And then you always seem to be right up to the edge. Yeah.
So did you have an enjoyable week off or what?
It was good. We should do this more often, actually, because, we've been going pretty hard. 94 episodes.
It's true,
straight.
But I got to tell you, in the week off, I feel like instead of doing something I like to do, I had to do a lot of work in something I don't like to do. So I think I'd rather do this.
Yeah. Well, it did give me a chance to spend some more time looking at new releases.
That's true. I did that too.
Build up the list of, new things to come up. And most importantly, the most enjoyable musical thing out of taking a week off is I actually got to go back and listen to some of my normal music collection.
Oh, yeah,
just
me too.
Leisurely. Yeah, because we spend so much time listening to new music that
the way we listen to music isn't normal. Because I'm not really. It's funny because you hear differently when you're not like have like a pen in your hand, or something like that, or the laptop on your lap table here or whatever.
Right. Trying to put those sounds into words, but that's what we do here at Adult Music. And we're back after, we went since September 2021 with no break. We just took our week off, and now we're on episode 121. Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind, bringing you the best new releases in classical and jazz from our very subjective perspective, that is.
Right. Very subjective. And but that's the way to go,
Yeah.
You got to listen for yourself and see what you think.
Well, as always, we're going to have 6 new recordings for you this week. And all the music that we're going to talk about, you can find links to in the episode description. There's Spotify, there's Apple Music, and then at the top, there's all of the music in one place in a playlist on Deezer, our favorite CD quality streaming platform.
well, your favorite one.
Yeah,
I guess it's my favorite one too because I don't have another one. But I'm looking now. Let's just say that I'm still mad about the missing tracks thing. I should really check and see if they've ever restored those tracks. Although this week I got lucky; they had all the tracks.
We'll see. We're expecting the arrival of Kobas to Japan later in the year, so maybe we'll see what they have to offer as well. Anyway, if you don't see the full description, the recording list or links, or the links aren't active wherever you listen to us, you can always come over to our host site as well. That's Podbean, PODBEAN.com. Everything's easy to follow over there for this and all previous episodes. And if you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us. Tell a music-loving friend. And if you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that helps us get listed in the music category recommendations. And that's another way we can get new listeners. Also, come over and follow us on our Facebook page. Get extra info. Lots of new releases throughout the week. Since we had a week off, I had a whole bunch of new releases that just came out up there if you want to check out things that may or may not make it into one of our podcasts. And you can leave a message or comment there as well. If you'd like to contact us directly with any comments, questions, or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. I also want to give a couple thanks to some very nice musicians we encountered. First of all, John Alabuni and his great recording, You Are Not Alone. And he sent us a couple of copies of this all the way to Japan here. It's on Skydeck Records. Really great original music that we talked about a few weeks ago. So if you haven't heard this yet, you want to definitely listen to this. I think this is going to be one of our favorite recordings this year so far.
Yeah, I think so too.
Probably show up in the best of list. And then just yesterday, Jason Kaiser's Shaw's Groove. This is a really great recording. Guitarist Jason Kaiser. This is on OA2 Records as part of Origin. And very interesting. 2 guitar, trumpet, bari sax arrangements of Woody Shaw, the great trumpeter's music. This was really an interesting recording we liked. And Jason sent us some signed copies. So I'll be giving that to you during the week, Mike.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, and so thanks to these great musicians. If you haven't checked out these recordings, they're two of our really favorite ones we've heard this year so far. And I just want to say, all the musicians that we've met from this Bay Area music scene, it'll be Jason Kaiser, Mimi Fox, and Brian Ho. They're all super nice, enthusiastic, really friendly people. They've got a really nice music vibe going on there. And, all the music is really cool too. So it's really been one of the nice things about this podcast is meeting people all around the world. And, we just happen to meet some really nice people all from one music scene that know each other too. So, I get some good vibes from that.
But I'm just looking up, we did a recording a few weeks past on the Beast label called Seicento Stravagante for cornetto and keyboard.
Right.
And remember, there were 2 tracks missing on Deezer. Mm-hmm. And I wrote to Robert Von Baar at Beast had responded to me. He's the head of the label. And he was looking to really get at them. He wasn't pleased about this situation at all. And I'm looking at the Deezer listing, and now they've got all 16 tracks. How about that?
Oh,
I guess amazing. He gave him hell.
Yeah,
way to go, Robert.
Yeah.
You're now my hero. I want you to know, Robert Von Baar, if you're listening to this podcast, I just ordered 9 Beast albums. Oh, wow. They were on sale, and there were a lot of them that came out this year that I really wanted to hear. They're all on SACD. You're just great. We love you here at Adult Music. So there you go.
And I did find the Arnold Bornkamp, the Barry Sachs classical recording from last time that was all messed up on Deezer. I was able to find all the tracks. The listing on Deezer still isn't correct, but it's correct on our playlist. So
I did write to that label too, but they didn't respond. So I don't know. I think they might not be have anybody in house there or something. It sounds like a little smaller label.
It's really nice when people send us these copies, because I figured out of the more than 700 CDs we've discussed, if we had purchased all of those, that would be more than $14,000 US. So far. We haven't made that much back from the podcast. So.
No, actually, but I think between my my novel, Extreme Music, please read it, listeners. It's available at Amazon.com. And this podcast, I still don't think I've made $100.
Well, we're serving a greater purpose. So.
Right, I know. Yeah, it's just
there
waiting
for
to wake some kid up at the next generation or something. Right. They'll say, "Wow, what a great time that was."
Yeah.
Who knew this was going on?
And before we get into this week's content, one more mention, and that's to our friends over at The Same Difference. 2 Jazz Fans, 1 Jazz Standard, a podcast we recommend you also check out, because we're always talking about the new jazz, new classical, and sometimes in these recordings we're going to come across some standard tunes. There'll be a few tonight, as usual, but Johnny Valenzuela and Tony Habra look exclusively at standards, and they pick one for each episode. That comes out twice a month, and they're going to talk about the history of the standard, play little versions, snippets of each version, and talk about what they like and don't like. So, if you want to get some background information and learn more about jazz standards, I recommend you check out their podcast. There'll be a link for it in the description as well.
All right, so we ready to go into the musical part of this episode?
I think tonight we're going to have some interesting combinations, sort of like, transcontinental, transnational kind of themes going on in here.
So should we just call the episode Trans? I bet it'll get us a lot of hits.
Yeah. They might be disappointed with the content, though. Transmusical, maybe.
We'll do anything for attention. Transmusical would be good.
Anyway, this first one you've got kind of surprised me because...
me too.
It's pretty interesting.
When I saw it and then I heard it, and I was really delighted by it. Okay, it's called... this is an album on the Atma Classique label, and it's called Calcutta 1789, à la croisée de l'Europe et de l'Inde.
Oh, I like the way you say that.
Yeah, me too. Well, the ladies do too. At the crossroads of Europe and India is what that means. Calcutta 1789. Now, this is a little bit of a musical history I didn't know anything about. So I was educated in the last 2 weeks, and I'm always happy to do that. I love being educated. It makes me feel young, like I still don't know things, because you don't ever want to know everything,
it's
do
better
you?
Than just being old and not knowing things. Yeah.
I guess so. Well, the thing is, I have you see, Russ has video on me now, so he can see my room here, and I've got like bookshelves like just crammed with books, and I'm sort of the people ask me, oh, you're going to read all his books? Probably not, but I'm of the Umberto Eco school, where having a lot of books that you haven't read is a constant reminder of things you don't know. So, right. And that's a good place to be. All right. It kind of makes you a little humble. And I do intend to read them all, but I probably won't live long enough. And besides, more books keep coming up. Okay. All right. Anyway, this is the ensemble that's on this recording is called Notturna. The director is Christopher Palameta, who also plays the oboe. And I'll name the whole ensemble here because they're a pretty interesting lot. Mika Putterman is on the traverso, which is kind of like you've seen those wooden recorders, right? And the traverso is played like a flute. It's kind of, you hold it to the left, except that it's made of wood. Oliver Brault on the violin, Dorian Bandy on violin and viola, Susie Napper on cello, Bryce Sayi on harpsichord, and featuring Uwe Neumann on sitar, and Sean Matevetsky on the tabla. Wow, you never really hear Western musicians on those instruments. You know, they're kind of usually Indians playing them.
Well, that's what I heard right away when this started. I heard harpsichord, and then I said, wait, that's tabla and sitar.
I know, it's really weird, but it works really well for a change. Arrangements, by the way, are by Notturna, and they are excellent. Also, I should mention the pitch on this album, A equals 415 hertz. That's very low.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Baroque era pitch. We usually get A equals 440 today if you want to compare. So it's a much brighter sound. This one isn't. Now, I really needed the booklet notes for this. It wasn't out on it still isn't out on a CD. It's coming out on July 7th, but it's available as a download or as a streaming, and that's how we heard it. And thankfully, the booklet notes are on online because I really needed them for this. I didn't know what was going on otherwise. Although it's a beautiful album anyway. Okay, well, the theme of the album is Calcutta in India as a cultural crossroads. Calcutta's in Bengal. It's now called Kolkata. They've changed the name to, I guess, be closer to, the Indian language that's spoken there or something. Anyway, it's in Bengal. It was founded as a trading post by members of the British East India Company in 1609. So I guess it just wasn't really a place before that. I don't know. I have to look into that. Anyway, here's what happened. The affluent merchants who traded there would travel with lavish entourages that invariably included privately hired musicians. Not a bad gig, huh? You want to come to India and entertain me? Okay. Yeah, sure.
The voyages must have been rough back then, though.
Yeah, I don't think there's much to. Well, if you're able to buy anything, you could probably sell it back in Britain for a much higher price. According to various sources, there was a lively and dynamic European musical presence in India at the end of the 18th century. I had no idea about this. The British colony of Calcutta had grown to a community of nearly 4,000 expatriates by 1780. That word expatriate, I mean, we're kind of expatriates. We just kind of came here and live here and, work here. I don't know. Here in Japan, I mean. Making it possible for musicians like William Hamilton Byrd, whose music we're going to hear on this album, to organize public subscription concerts and even large-scale oratorio productions, which we're not going to hear on this album. Fashionable composers of the time like Carl Friedrich Abel, and Johann Christian Bach, one of the Bach sons, were on the programs. But, interestingly enough, one peculiarity is the prominence given to ancient masters, ancient with quotation marks. But I should mention, I'm reading this from the booklet notes, such as Purcell and Handel. Now, this wasn't done at the time. There wasn't this idea of a repertoire or of the great composers that we have today. The past was the past. Nobody listened to it. You always needed new music, and this is probably why we have so much music from the past that has now piled up. The whole idea of a repertoire came about with Felix Mendelssohn in the mid-19th century, and then it seems to have gotten narrower and narrower as the 20th century went on. And then in the 1980s, it started opening up a bit again due to a lot of scholarship and the like. The reason why Purcell and Handel were played there was it was believed that their music contained, quote, colorful expressions of imperial values,
Oh.
Oh, imperial values. I went to. It sounds like an oxymoron today, but it had a meaning today.
The subliminal tax messages or something.
Yeah, maybe. In the collective mind of colonial Anglo-Indian high society, which is what this would have been. All right, so this is the music that they would have listened to. And there are a lot of really interesting stories about this. And the first track is by an anonymous composer. And the track is called Sakia, or Sakia. I don't know where the accent goes or if there even is one. But it's a Hindustani air for mixed ensemble. And it's a transcription of a Hindustani melody, which begins with the verse Sakia, cupbearer. Sakia is a cupbearer. It is the season of spring. And it was transcribed by Margaret Fouke and structured almost as an 18th century jam session. The melody is first performed on the harpsichord here, then on the tabla and sitar. So this album really gives you what you're going to have like throughout this album. It's really interesting. And then European instruments join in one by one, the flute, oboe, violin, and then cello. And the piece culminates in a full tutti section before reverting to its original configuration as a piece for solo keyboard. The tune is a recta, which is a form particularly admired by and comprehensible to Europeans, thanks to its recognizable ABA structure. And the ensemble believe it wonderfully captures the interplay and aesthetic appreciation of two equally sophisticated musical traditions. Yes, Indian tradition was and still is highly, highly sophisticated and is very different than the Western music tradition with its rhythms and its sort of the way the only thing I really know much about it is really rags, like the high level classical music and just how they kind of, the structure of them, which is still very heavily based on improvisation. The ensemble has done its best to vary their instrumentation here. The harpsichord sound that begins with is pretty and light. It's really nice, a nice chimey sound, very gentle and stately, very European. Now, the melody sounds European. It's an Indian melody, but I think they've taken away some of its like Indian spice. I mean, you would have to on a harpsichord, which is a little more rigid in its tonality. You can't really bend the strings, get quarter tones, and these different sorts of scales that were available in India at the time and still are. Suddenly, at 1 minute and 7 seconds in, the sitar and tabla come in, and we get that Indian flavor. Although the rhythm is pretty metrical, it does sound. It doesn't sound like it's really going off in the Indian manner too much. And it's very European for this to be a full-on Indian rendition of the piece. That's because the winds, I guess, come in over the tabla to play the melody again, and they have to be able to play it. So this has been kind of squeezed sort of into a more Western-sounding scale. We get a sense of the Indianness of the theme from the sitar, but it's played very clearly in a European sense, without much Indian spice added, so you're not getting in those bended notes too much. There's a little bit of that. Or only suggestions of them. It's a pretty airy theme, very melodic. The pacing and feel is very sunny and pleasant, and so is the whole album, by the way. Sunny and pleasant is a really good set of adjectives to describe this record. This would be a great start to anyone's day. You might want to program this into your streaming and wake up to it. I think it'll put you in the right place at the beginning of the day. And then you get on the highway going to work, and it's all downhill from there. But at least you'll start the right way. Anyway, strings come in the 3rd minute, repeat the theme, playing along with the sitar. There's a great tabla solo in the 5th minute as the sitar repeats the theme. And then the whole ensemble comes in with the theme, and the solo harpsichord, as we mentioned, ends the piece. It's really pretty. You should give this a listen. And the sitar and tabla don't sound intrusive among the Western instruments at all. They actually blend really well. I was actually kind of dreading that because I was thinking of past, like, say, jazz collaborations with Indian artists.
Right.
And they never work. Like, I remember, like, Kenny G with a sitar player. Oh, my God. It was a very ill-advised, sort of recording there. But no, this works exceptionally well. Whatever they did, they made it. It's really beautiful. Anyway, tracks 2 and 3, Johann Christian Bach, we're squarely in Europe again, or like the European part of this Indian concert. This whole program plays out like an evening of music making, you could imagine at someone's house. They're all chamber works. This is a quintet in F major, opus 22, number 2, for oboe, violin, viola, cello, and obbligato harpsichord. It's got 2 movements. The first is Allegro Comodo. It's got an oboe theme over the continuo. Johann Christian's theme is neatly conceived and chirpy, So it's kind of a nice follow-up to the Indian piece we heard first. The strings take it next, sounding a bit in the background. The wind's always up front. The strings do sound a bit recessed on the album. They don't really come out, but I rather like their sound. They're nice and smooth. There's no vibrato on them. Let me see here. The winds are always up front on this album, too. And the winds have a satisfying sound to them. They kind of head towards the shrill side without really getting there. They're never unpleasant to listen to, but they do kind of get on the loud side. At 1:14, the harpsichord gets an impressive solo with the wind playing accompaniment over it. And I appreciated the fact that the harpsichord, though soloing, remains quiet, as it would be at a live performance. It does kind of have its natural sound, like it's a little far away here. At around 1:55, the opening material repeats, and we're off into a rushing development section. The opening repeats lightly and charmingly. And it's a pleasant, heart-lifting movement. Then we get the second movement, Tempo di Minuetto. This comes across as a typically square-rhythmed minuet, suitable for a stylized dance. There's a pleasing false cadence around 30 seconds, which we hear again at 2:14 in the repeat of the opening material. It's welcome to hear that false cadence in an otherwise straightforwardly written minuet. The trio section starts at 2:25 and has the chiming harpsichord with a pleading violin taking up the theme after the harpsichord. Very light, as befits a trio. I love the chiming tone of the harpsichord on this recording, and it's very pretty, and it's got a satisfying final cadence too. We hear Johann Christian Bach again in track 4, Quintet in D major, Opus 22 number 1, for Traverso. That's the flute. Oboe, violin, cello, and obbligato harpsichord. This is only the second movement. We hear the andantino. The Traverso plays in a high range over pizzicato, cello, and harpsichord, and it borders on shrillness up there. When the Traverso repeats, the oboe comes in with a counter melody, which is very pretty. At the minute 7-second mark, we go into a middle section led by a theme on the oboe. The material is paced beautifully so that one finds oneself sighing along as the themes unfold. It's really beautiful playing and a beautiful composition too. At 2:36, a minor key theme is heard in the solo cello, which is not front and center on the recording, but was accurate for the time. It probably would have sounded like this then. The orchestration keeps the ear moving to all of the individual instruments in the ensemble, the material being passed to all of them, and the opening repeats at the end in the Traverso, the flute. Tracks 5 through 8, George Friedrich Handel, Quartet in G major, My Song Shall Be Away, for oboe, 2 violins, and bass. Now, the first movement, Largo and Staccato, has a lovely oboe sound, but the recording has changed. It sounds a bit further away, and there's a lot of room reverb on it. It still comes up well on the recording, the music, but I liked the drier acoustic better. I don't know what happened here. I guess the engineer wanted the oboe to fully bloom in the room, which it does, but I just kind of feel like there's too much room sound now. Anyway, this goes on through all the movements. Allegro, this comes on like a continuation of the opening introductory material. It's busy, and the oboe especially is busy. And Christopher Palameta, the oboist and director, plays well, but I feel like the business of the instrument would have come across more satisfyingly in the drier acoustic. I'm going to keep complaining about this, really. He's perfectly audible, though. The rhythm is kept tight and lively throughout. Good enthusiasm from the ensemble, and it actually sounds like there's an odd fade on the last chord. Something having to do with the recording, not the playing. I don't think they faded it. Third movement, Adagio, is a slower movement, introductory in nature, with the oboe lyrically spinning out its melody, and that leads to the fourth movement, Allegro. Repeated notes on the harpsichord and strings start this fugal theme, but it doesn't stay a fugue for long. The oboe is quickly part of the texture, and the ear jumps from the oboe to strings to follow along, a pleasing effect. Again, the rhythm is lively, making the opening repeated notes of the theme feel like a springboard that lifts the preceding melody high into the air. There's a lot of bloom on the orchestration at the end of the movement, but the spacious reverb, for me anyway, detracts from it a bit. It's still a good... I don't want to complain about the recording. It sounds good, but I was more satisfied with the first 4 tracks, and then these came on, and it was a little different. I just didn't like the change. Anyway, the spacious reverb continues in the next Henry Purcell piece, If Love's a Sweet Passion, which is a song from the Fairy Queen. This features the oboe again. It's originally a song, but the melody is passed from section to section in this arrangement. The piece is brief at under 2 minutes. When I say section to section, I mean like first to say the strings, then to the winds, things like that. It kind of, instead of being sung by like a single person. It's a brief piece at under 2 minutes. The acoustic is spacious again, maybe too much so, but it doesn't affect the detail in this piece as much as in the previous Handel fast movements. Track 10, Henry Purcell, Fairest Isle, King Arthur from King Arthur, is a song arrangement. This is a pretty famous song, actually. The traverso has much of the opening theme here, but Mika Putterman is blended with the ensemble very well. The piece is played with a fluttering rhythm like a handkerchief wafting on a breeze. It's really pretty. Track 11, Carl Friedrich Abel, Quartet in B-flat major, Opus 12, number 5 for oboe, violin, viola, and bass. We are back to the drier acoustic here, so the recording is sounding to my satisfaction once again here. The first movement is a two-movement work. The first movement is un poco allegro, and there's a drier acoustic here for the strings and harpsichord continuo. The recording is much more clear now and beautiful as in the opening tracks. We hear the oboe again, playing thematic material, conversing with the strings. The piece is taken at a quick tempo, but it's lively at this tempo, and that makes it appealing and sort of heart-lifting. A lot of this music on this, the way it's played, the way it's phrased, really lifts the heart. It sounds just really good. It gave me this nice light feeling throughout the entire album. I really enjoyed this a lot. The tempo gives the rhythm some extra lift, and I like the combined string sound here. It's vibrato-less, and one can hear the individual strands even when they're playing in parallel. The light emotion and occasional conversational quality of the thematic writing are both captured well by the ensemble. And the second and final movement, Rondo, starts with less energy than the first movement. The ensemble takes this at a slower, more deliberate tempo, as if it's a courtly dance melody, but they shape the lines appealingly. There's a satisfying dip to the downbeats. The contrast between the sweet-toned oboe and the smooth, vibrato-less strings brings a lot of appeal. The oboe gets the solo material well recorded here, and Christopher Palameta on the oboe draws some appealing phrasing out of the melody. There's an appealing sudden turn to the minor key in the trio section, completely played by the strings. The rondo theme repeats, and the return of the oboe plays the theme. All right, now track 13, we're up to William Hamilton Byrd's Oriental Miscellany, and this is from 1789. Number 15, Recta, which is a type of Indian song. Mera Pera Hablaré. I didn't say that right. I have no idea what that sounds like, but Indian listeners, apologies. You could write to me and complain if you like. For mixed ensemble. Okay, I have to explain what this is a little bit, even though it's very easy on the ear. So Hindustani airs were very popular, along with the European music from back home for these, what would you call them? These settlers, let's say, these colonial people. This is really one of the first forays of Western classical music into a crossover world music genre. And it's something that would mark classical music as it went on into the 19th century, where people were kind of listening to other cultures and trying to interpret it in a Western way. We hear that like in Debussy and his like gamelan type compositions and things like that. Although they sound nothing like a gamelan, but it's a Western sort of idea of that. Anyway, this was happening way back in 1789. And of course we had like these alla turca movements in Mozart, which were kind of imitating like the Turkish army like instruments and things like that of the time. Okay, there's always been a fascination for the exotic in European art, and many of the merchants' wives, who were often amateur keyboardists, transcribed for the harpsichord the Hindustani airs they heard during these live Nautch performances, which were soirees that included music making and Kathak choreography by professional Mughal court musicians and dancing girls. Two of these women were Sophia Plowden, stationed in Lucknow, and her friend Margaret Falk, who we mentioned earlier, based in Benares. Both Plowden and Falk transcribed Bengali and Rajasthani songs they heard with the aid of the harpsichord, sitting with Indian musicians such as the Kashmirian courtesan Kanum Jan and her entourage in 1788. Plowden's work set the stage for William Hamilton Byrd's Oriental Miscellany, a collection consisting mainly of 30 Hindustani airs transcribed for the harpsichord and published in Calcutta in 1789. These short salon pieces are based on original Indian melodies that were transcribed into European notation and then harmonized in arrangements for solo keyboard. So that means they were changed. All right, so they don't. I guess the original melody is discernible, but it's in a Western sort of key, sort of, a set of Western tones, let's say. We know that Europeans found Indian music to be fascinating yet perplexing, and it presented difficulties of documentation and analysis. Indian music incorporated almost imperceptible quarter tones to the European ear anyway,
right,
and was often either unmetered or rhythmically complex, and featured frequent and, quotation marks, wild modulations. It was neither constructed on triad-based tonal harmony nor written in staff notation, and it was still essentially oral in transmission and extemporized in performance. So oral, A-U-R-A-L, okay? So you would hear it and you'd imitate and you'd play. The resulting transcriptions are therefore quintessentially European, where the transcribers did their best with the means available to document elusive sounds that would not readily conform to existing Western paradigms. All right, we're a little past that now, but this is 1789. These are the first forays into starting to understand and enjoy music of foreign lands. Anyway, this piece opens with a more Indian-flavored rhythm and modal melody, which is unusual in Western music at this time. They really like to stick to those major and minor scales. For me, it comes across as more Middle Eastern due to the modes. There are tablas accompanying, but they're very discreet here, accenting only the main beats with its lowest frequency note, that middle thump that it does. The entire ensemble seems to be involved in this piece, and the melodies change often. The shape again seems to be ABA, with the opening theme for full ensemble returning at around 2:45. The sweetness of tone and the Baroque palette of techniques fall lightly on the ear and make this faintly exotic and appealing. Really, on the first listen, you'll love this. Tracks 14 through 16 are Handel again, excerpts from his songs, selected from his oratorios for the harpsichord, voice, hautbois, or the oboe, or German flute. The first song is A perché giusto ciel, sung by Rodolind. It's from the opera Rodolinda. The opening is more recitativo-like in its lightness, and the theme is traded again, upping the appeal where words are missing. When I say traded, I mean traded between the instruments. The theme is touching and draws sympathy for the character. I like the light timbres and arrangements used on this album, and they make the music fall that much more sympathetically on the ear. Boy, I'm just going to say this for every track. I really did enjoy the whole sound palette of this album. The work remains at this slow, sympathetic tempo. Track 15 is called Will the Sun Forget to Streak, from Solomon. It's more noble and sort of manly, with stronger, thicker harmony. The oboe plays the theme, and the traverso takes over for the entire middle section. Then we get a sort of melodic profile that we hear a lot in Handel, in Falsa Immagine, which is from Ottone. I'm not really sure if it's an opera or an oratorio. But it's got some appealing, wondering pauses to the melody. The three arias on this album are well chosen for their variety of profile, the outer ones having more of a feminine feel to them, the middle one more masculine. It's lightly scored, and the oboe takes the lead in this track 16. Track 17, we hear William Hamilton Byrd again, Oriental Miscellany number 13. It's a tarana called Dandara Vake. Again, Indian people, forgive me for my mispronunciation. This is for harpsichord and sitar only. Wow. And interestingly enough, the sitar doesn't have to sound like the harpsichord, but it can sound like one, and does a little bit in this track. The harpsichord is distantly recorded and blends heavily into the room acoustic. You can make out what it's playing, but the harmony tends to cloud in the room ambience. The sitar is also distant and blends with the harpsichord sound to such a degree that you often don't notice it's there. It's only the plucking quality of the attack that makes you realize it's playing. It's very quietly played here, and played more in the style of a Western instrument. The melody is very pretty, and one can understand how the Europeans present in India would have taken to it. I want to say, I think the acoustic is so distant on this track because the engineer wanted the sitar and harpsichord to be almost indiscernible from each other, like one peeking out of the texture and then going back into it. And if he had recorded a little more closely, there would have been more contrast between the two. So that's what I'm guessing for that. Anyway, we end with a brief Henry Purcell track, Rondeau from the Indian Queen. It sways and has tabla accompaniment, which is very discreet again. The Baroque quality of the work comes through most strongly, and the tabla comes across as a Renaissance-era percussion-like ensemble, if you know what it does sound like, due to the discreet way in which it's played, though its timbre gives it away as a tabla. Towards the end, it steps into the forefront a bit more with more complex rhythms, and for the last stretch of melody, it accompanies the quietly played sitar to end the album on completely Indian timbres. All right, so that's this album, and I want to highly recommend it. It's really a unique listen and very beautiful, too. First, there's a beautiful, spacious quality to the recording. For most of the tracks, sometimes it's a little too spacious, like on tracks 5 through 10, but don't worry about that. We're able to hear to the back of what is usually opaque scoring for a Baroque ensemble. The entire CD comes across as elegant in overall sound, with even the Indian instruments registering lightly and charmingly on the ear. Part of this is the music itself. The music is gentle for the most part, and the album gave me a really lighthearted feel. It really lifted my spirits gently. It's ideal morning listening, as it's light and spacious and lifts the spirits and just gives you what you want to feel when you wake up out of bed. I think the ensemble could have gone all out and had a singer for the songs on the album in order to recreate an evening of 1789 European music making in India more completely. Surely there were singers. But I personally like it like this. I'm glad there aren't any singers on the album. There's an odd change of sound quality, as I said, in tracks 5 through 10, where the acoustic becomes more reverberant, but it's not enough to turn me off the album. Again, ideal morning listening. I loved this. I'd like to get it on a CD. I'll have to look for it. I think it's coming out on July 7th, so I'll be checking for it.
It's mostly Baroque music, wonderfully played. I really enjoyed the oboe tone and the kind of leading presence it had in these pieces. And the pieces that incorporate the tabla and sitar are just really fun. It's just an earlier era of what we now call world music that we kind of don't know much about, or we don't think about it now historically. But it's very interesting, and as Mike has explained, some of the information from the album notes, definitely you can get these album notes from the website, and I think you get a lot more out of it. Get a full historical perspective of what was going on between England and India musically at this time. And I'd like to hear some more of what happened in those collaborations. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, I should mention, this is basically a Baroque album, and it's mostly Western Baroque music. There are just a little touches of the Indian in there.
Yeah, but very nice touches.
Creative, nice touches. And it gives us a little, it's like we take a little trip in our mind, back to that time. All right, our next album is an album of César Franck chamber music. We get the violin sonata, the omnipresent violin sonata, I should mention. We hear his piano trio number 1 and piano quintet. And we also get an extra piece by Louis Vierne, his piano quintet. This is by Trio Wanderer, who we like a lot generally on this podcast. I remember listening to we didn't do this on the podcast because it was a little before that, but they did a Schumann complete chamber music album that was really great just a few years ago. Trio Wanderer consists of Vincent Koch on the piano, Jean-Marc Philippe Vajabedian on the violin, Raphael Pidou on the cello, and then we have for the filling out the ensemble for the piano quintet is Catherine Montier on violin and Christophe Gaugué on the viola. This is on the Harmonia Mundi label, and it's a 2 CD album because Franck was also a little bit inspired by Wagner, and that meant everything had to be long because everything from the time of Wagner until around 1945 after the war, people did really long pieces of music.
Right.
I want to say I really appreciate that, although they are long. I'm like, man, I wish this was a little shorter. But in our sort of 8-second attention span era that we are now living in, apparently the internet has shortened our attention span. Music like this pushes against that, and it kind of gives us a more spacious. Things have to unfold.
Right.
You get these melodies and where are they going to go, and you have to just kind of stay with them, to find out. I think it's really good for us. It's a good, alternative or just a contrast or something to give us a little bit of a workout from our usual, quick changes and things like that. Anyway, this is split into 2 CDs, and it's labeled like this on the streaming services too. So the first CD features Franck's piano quintet and Louis Vierne's piano quintet. So we have the 2 extra players on this these tracks. All right, now the Franck piano quintet in F minor, Opus 14. I've heard works of this in the past and never really took to it until now because I liked this performance a lot. The first movement is molto moderato quasi lento, and I like the warm yet passionate beginning the Wanderer with Montier and Gaugué give this work. It often comes across not as passionate, but histrionic, and that's what I kind of never really liked about it. But they sort of temper that opening theme a bit. It's neatened up. The piano plays calmly afterwards, and the opening theme is played more for its sense of line than for passion. Don't worry, there's going to be plenty of passion in the works on CD too, but I'll get to that when I get to that. Anyway, I like the violin tone. It's a bit old school. I'm guessing that's going to be, I don't know if it's Montier or Philippe's Variabedjian. I don't know who that is. I'm guessing it's the Trio Wanderer guy, Philippe's Variabedjian, because we hear it again on CD2 when only the Trio Wanderer is playing. But it's a beautiful tone. It's kind of old school. It's got this kind of sort of, there's a nice sort of woody kind of vibrato to it. I don't know how I describe it. I kind of want to call it woody or nutty or something like that. It's not this full like tone that you normally get today, like a sheen. It doesn't seem to have like a sheen to it. It's a little more rustic, I guess. Okay, the piano playing is exquisitely lyrical, and the sound quality of the whole ensemble in the recording is beautifully transparent. It's an ideal chamber recording, especially for a work like this that can come across as unwieldy on a record. The piano introduces an energetic, passionate section after 3 minutes with some sped-up figuration. The Wanderer take this slightly faster than I've heard on other recordings. The movement switches between slower lyrical playing and highly passionate, faster material. The piano is discreet throughout the movement, and I really appreciated this approach. It allows the musical line to come into focus more clearly. That said, there's some appealing thunder in the middle of the movement and the middle of the track, provided by the piano. Koch has a beautiful way of keeping the melody in the forefront despite stormy accompaniment in his left hand that makes this performance very successful. The strings, meanwhile, get a romantic feel that give the rhythm and tone a sweet, elastic feel. Listen especially when they come in the 11th minute. This very long and very big movement reaches an exciting climax toward the end of its 14th minute. Well prepared for and well taken. The material then peters out to a quiet tonic chord. Second movement, lento con molto sentimento. The opening and repeated chords are gently taken in the piano, and we get that appealing old-school flexible tone from the violin line, a sound that goes straight to the heart, and that we simply don't hear enough of these days. The lyrical melody, because the violins are going for a big tone now, they want to be heard at the back of the room. The lyrical melody has a lot of harmonic space to play out in, and the ensemble play with an appealing hush that draws the listener into its circle. This movement is also fairly long at over 9 minutes. As I said, César Franck doesn't do anything small. So there's a lot of time to revel in the gorgeous tone and sensitivity of the playing. There is a crescendo and build-up of passionate tension leading up to the 7th minute, then a beautiful letting go of that power into a hushed final 2 minutes, leading to a sensitively taken ending. The third and final movement, Allegro non troppo ma con fuoco, a rushing, circling violin line starts the piano, with ominous chords heard in the piano and other strings. There's something church-like about the piano's chords after the 30-second mark. And at 109, the theme proper starts over an odd rhythmic figure in 3/4 or 6/8 in the piano, which the strings soar over. This is juxtaposed by a tension-building, sturdier section. There's a crescendo to a dramatic forte halfway through in the 4th minute. Then another wave comes in whose climax doesn't come. In fact, there are a lot of evaded climaxes in this movement, a la Wagner, where you just build up and then you're just left hanging there. Earlier material and then the opening line is heard. This is part of Franck's cyclic style of performing, where themes you heard in the first movement come back in the third, and he does that in a lot of his works. The movement is full of false cadences in which a cadence seems to approach only to have the harmony suddenly veer away from it with some new texture. Listen from the 6th minute on for a series of these events in which many of the previous themes are paraded before us before a final climax is approached forte, crescendoing and decrescendoing in overlapping waves, again beautifully realized by the ensemble, until the final notes are hammered out dramatically but musically. The ensemble's realization of this piece is highly musical, outlining the form and themes satisfyingly and playing down the sometimes overwrought emotion a bit. I approve of this approach. I really enjoyed this performance of this work. I think this is the best performance of the piano quintet I've heard, and it's also the best performance on this album. Okay, they tend to vary, but the piano quintet is the one to sample, I guess. Anyway, next we get the piano quintet by Louis Vierne. I'll give you some information about him. He was born virtually blind and was a student in César Franck's organ class as an auditor in 1889, and he eventually studied with Charles-Marie Widor, who took over Franck's class after Franck died in 1890. This quintet is his most famous chamber work. It was written in memory of his son Jacques, who was killed in World War I. Officially, it was said he was killed in action, so he's a hero of France. But it seems in reality, he was shot after refusing to fight. So it's probably a good thing they didn't tell his dad that. Anyway, he did get a piece written for him as a result. He wanted to create something that would stir in the hearts of fathers the deepest fibers of love for a dead son. Boy, what a sad story, though. I don't think he ever found out, though. They said he was killed in action. Anyway, first movement, poco lento, and then moderato. It starts with tolling piano chords heard at the beginning, followed by wispy string harmony. The strings manage beautiful tone and a warm sound in this rather unstable, wandering harmony. The full ensemble starts a tension-building crescendo as early as the first minute. The cello plays the more stable melodic sound theme, the melodic second theme, at 2 minutes over repeating piano chords, and the violin plays it again with sweet tone in the highest register. The full ensemble reaches an explosive climax at 3:19, which leads directly to a repeat of the theme fortissimo. At 3:44, a new, more agitated piano accompaniment starts, which the strings play short, anxious lines over. There's a lovely pulling back to reveal a high violin line at about the 5th minute over repeating piano chords. This gets handed off to the cello, and the two play in duet. Lots of expression and vibrato bring a lot of emotion to the performance, so we're getting kind of a little more emotional in this piece than we were in the previous one. The movement has a lot of agitated moments to it, and the crescendo in the 7th minute to another big climax at 7:25 is another example, with the piano pounding out a melody in the bass end as the strings saw at the accompanying harmony. It's a stormy section, thickly harmonized. It suddenly falls away to a lamenting piano theme in the 8th minute, and the movement tapers off on that emotion. The second movement is Larghetto sostenuto. It has a ghostly string harmony at the beginning in a 1-2 rhythm, dun-dun. It's very evocative. I like the approach. It engaged me right away. The cello plays a sad minor theme. The piano takes over the theme solo, filling in the harmony as well. The strings come in to add to it as the piano falls into accompaniment. The melodic material then reappears in the cello, after which the piano builds up a crescendo and changes the texture in the 3rd minute. The new rhythm and melody congeals into a thick harmony by the 5th minute, then suddenly pauses for the piano to a brief solo line. At 5:30 or so, the strings take over. In the 6th minute, there's a brief meditative section before the full harmony grief takes over again, forte. Pulsing rhythm at 6:55 only builds up the implacable emotion. Another brief meditative moment is heard in the piano in the 8th minute, after which we hear a new arrangement of the opening theme, softly played in the bass end of the strings over an arpeggiating violin. The arpeggiated figure is handed around the strings. It's in the viola next, as the melody wanders to the cello. The ending piano theme is menacing, responded to by placating string harmony. The quintet capture the constantly changing, but not too subtle emotions very well. Third movement, maestoso, agitato, allegro, molto risoluto. It's 3 sections. We hear banged out, jagged piano chords at the beginning, responded to with sweet, lamenting string lines. A tremolo starts in the strings at 38 seconds, sounding ominous as the piano builds a theme in the bass, then gets a lighter solo line in the high end. At 150, the piano suddenly explodes into an aggressive, surging rhythm, and the strings play an impassioned melody over it. There's real rhythmic drive to this section, which the ensemble maintain admirably. Variations on this sort of mad dance of a rhythm continue with consistently interesting rearrangements of timbral color. At 5:01, it suddenly stops and the piano plays a rumbling repeated note in the bass with tension-building line in the right hand. The string come in pale-sounding and vibratoless, playing harmony over the piano. At 6:52, the piano tries another approach with a line that reaches up the piano and reintroduces the galloping first theme in the strings. All the ferocious momentum is back, with the ensemble impressively sacrificing none of the beauty of individual tone they've maintained throughout. Lines are well shaped and easy to pull out of the sometimes dense textures, and the rhythm is always palpable. There's a big, exciting final cadence. So I think in contrast to this work, I was happy that they played down the Franck piano quintet, because they really go for the histrionics in this piece. Now for me, the histrionics don't stop. We go into CD2, and we're really in that Franckian histrionic mode. We next hear the Violin Sonata in A major. This is one of my favorite pieces ever, and it's had some really great performances on record. And here you're getting 2 members of the trio Wanderer, the violinist and pianist, playing it together. The poor cellist has to sit this one out. And I thought this performance, it was okay. There have been such great performances out there that I kind of thought, well, why did they record this? But probably because they wanted to, because they love it like I do. Anyway, let's hear what they did here. The first movement, Allegretto ben moderato. The piano opening is as poetic as most versions of this often recorded piece that I've heard. The violin has that old school vibrato tone that I've admired on this album so far. The opening is taken appealingly, and the violin line has a pleading quality to it as presented here. The cadence at about 145 doesn't come across with the sense of arrival that it does on other recordings, but it is satisfying. The piano's next busily arpeggiated line is a bit more measured and less expressive than I've heard, but satisfying nevertheless. When the opening theme repeats at 3:18, the piano accompaniment stands out more than usual, which I was interested to hear. The next climax arrives with more impact than the first. I don't like the hesitating piano line at 5:12. It sounds kind of contrived to my ear. I feel like it should flow more. Again, maybe personal taste. There's a nice sudden let-up in volume before the last chord. Second movement, Allegro. This stormy movement, the piano line at the beginning is played without pedal. It's nice to hear the notey detail. Usually this is played as this big storm build-up with the bass notes all blurring. After this, we get the usual romantic approach. The violin is admirably audible despite its rather quiet tone, in spite of the busy piano line when it plays the theme. This is a movement taken in a highly musical way, but I feel like it sacrifices some of its passion to achieve that musicality. My ears are mostly on the violin in this movement. The line at 158 comes across as prosaic to my ear. It's not putting me off, but I keep thinking of all the great performances of this piece that I've heard, not least Chung and Lupu, who for me are still the single best performance of this on record. They're absolute magic throughout. By 252, when the music quietens, it's lost all forward momentum. The section at 3:13 is pretty, with the piano pushing the rhythm forward a bit with the quickly taken chords. At 4:24, the entire texture is clear, and the piano takes these themes prettily. Detail admirably comes to the fore here. This sort of gives the repeat of the opening material a bit more momentum and passion. It sounds suitably stormy in the repeat. The approach to the end is well timed out, and the details on the violin's accelerating line are pleasing to the ear. All of the rhythmic impetus toward the end is clearly heard. The third movement, Recitativo Fantasia, ben moderato, to molto lento, sorry. The piano starts this well, but the violin's burnished tone isn't really doing much to put across the almost histrionic passion that I expect from this movement. And in fact, the following piano line doesn't sound that sympathetic to the violin's opening statement. This feels more of an ensemble approach than two individuals conversing. The violin's next outburst at 2 minutes is too beautiful to be sympathized with. There's not enough contrast between the impassioned opening and the assuaging sound of the violin and piano playing together at 4 minutes and afterwards to pull me in. There's nothing wrong with the performance itself, it's just that there are so many better ones that have characterized the music in more compelling ways. It's a chamber ensemble approach to a piece that I feel has been better served by a pair of soloists. Fourth movement, Allegretto poco mosso. The opening of the canon is pretty and touching. There's good clarity in the performance, which the recording captures well. All of the contours of the theme are outlined well by the ensemble. The violin tone does a lot to pull the ear in with its burnished tone. When it gets to the second theme, it takes it quickly. The change of texture at around 2:35 is heard with great clarity. The climaxes in the more fortissimo sections leading to climaxes aren't quite the emotional releases they can be. The movement as a whole is rather tame, and that serves the canonic material well, but not the more impassioned outbursts. The end is reached with good momentum. Now, the thing is, this is a perfectly fine performance of this work, but overall, just because I love this work so much and I've heard so many great performances of it, I came across as a bit disappointed by it. Now, I don't want to put listeners off. You listen to it yourself and find out what you think, but I keep thinking of Kyunghwa Chung and Radu Lupu. It's just such a great performance. And there are other ones I liked too, but that one's still the peak. Anyway, the last work on the album is Trio Concertante in F sharp major, Opus 1, number 1 by César Franck. Now, he composed 3 piano trios, his Opus 1, number 1, 2, and 3. Why not, like the Schumann disc 3 years ago, add another disc, have this be a 3-disc set, and put the other 2 piano trios on that? Anyway, we only get this one on this recording. Now, the first movement is Andante con moto. This starts with a creeping staccato piano bass line. The cello plays the completely contrasting legato, highly sustained melody, and the violin comes in with a quicker line. The tones of the instruments blend well but are all distinct. This, incidentally, is the first time we're hearing the trio as a trio on this album. About an hour and a half after about an hour and a half of music. The violin plays the second theme sweetly and appealingly. The characterization of each individual part in this piece is appealing and compelling. The piano seems to have a staccato part throughout. It sounds close to percussive, driving the more melody-infused instruments on. The piano finally turns to more melodic material just after the 3-minute mark, and Vincent Koch on the piano insists on keeping the bass staccato to throw the rest of the material into relief. The cello and violin eventually join in with the legato melody. By 5 minutes, the piano is back to staccato patterns, descending here as the strings play harmony. A fortissimo is reached at 6:30, and the entire next section is played at this dynamic. Here, the sort of histrionic character of the material is well characterized. There's a sense of anxiety to the material over the piano's repeating chords. For the tail end of the section, the music decrescendos, and we hear a repeat of the piano's melodic theme from back at the 3-minute mark. The creeping staccato bass line from the opening returns to end the movement, and the last thing we hear is a final forte chord. Second movement, Allegro molto. Repeated staccato chords on the piano provide accompaniment to this movement, which seems derived from the scherzo of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. You remember that one? We have a similar rhythm here. In fact, we have the same rhythm and kind of a similar theme as well. We then hear more rustic sounding material as the kind of middle section to the scherzo theme. There's a strong cadence at around the 2-minute mark, then a new section with new themes in the same scherzo meter are heard handed off between violin and cello. The piano eventually gets involved in this. At 2:54, the opening material is heard again, quickly moving to the rustic double stop theme. At 3:52, there's a smooth rising chord sequence from the piano that the strings echo, then play along with. At the 5-minute mark, the scherzo material is outlined by pizzicato strings and staccato piano. The line rises until it reaches a climactic peak, then wanders, crescendoing again to a connection with the third movement, which is marked Allegro maestoso. It begins with an emphatic chord and a new rhythm. The piano is pretty busy with scales and octaves as the violin and cello play winding melodies. At 1:29, a quieter, more lyrical melody is heard. with the cello playing pizzicati and the piano accompanimental material. As a variation on the theme is heard, the piano gets busy in the accompaniment with virtuoso material. Indeed, this is a set of variations, this movement. The one in the third minute quietens down, then there's an emphatic marching version of it in the fourth minute, and a rather wild twisting outburst at 4:45. At 5:32, a new variation bursts out of the piano accompaniment with the violin leading. I like the creeping pizzicato variation at 5:45. This builds up to a new one with an emphatic, busy piano accompaniment as the cello plays the theme. There's some dips into a quieter dynamic, but they're momentary, and the ending is played at a straight fortissimo to the end. Yes, César Franck likes the fortissimo dynamic. Okay, and that's all of the music. To sum up, big-boned music was in vogue in Franck's time, and we certainly get that here, both in volume and in work length. I have to say, after 2 hours of this, Franck really likes the fortissimo dynamic marking. I like it too, but I don't know about 2 hours of it. A lot of this music is played to the volume saturation point. Now, that doesn't affect the recording in any negative way. The recording is fantastic and captures all of the dynamics really well. The trio Wanderer and their guests managed to make all of this timbrally attractive and musical throughout. The two quintets are the best pieces here, timbral beauty coming out of the textures. In fact, this two-disc set really sounds like two separate albums, and I'm rather curious about why the Wanderer didn't include trios 2 and 3 on a third disc, as I mentioned earlier. The first trio comes across well, the only time we hear the entire trio play as their own ensemble on the album. For me, the best account is the Franck Piano Quintet, as I mentioned earlier. I liked hearing it toned down a bit from its often hysterical, passionate emotion on other performances, and the textures all come across beautifully, though the inclusion of the violin sonata for me was a mistake. There are far more poetic versions of it available than the one we have here, and Raphael Pidou had to sit it out. A lot of Franck's histrionics are toned down in all but the piano trio at the end. Perhaps the Wanderer didn't want to exhaust us, but I think I was pretty exhausted by the end of this anyway. The album makes a decent two-part program, and despite my reservations for the violin sonata, all of the works come up in good performances and interpretations. I've got to say, though, listening to this album made me realize that I prefer to hear a single Franck work mixed in with other composers rather than an entire two-disc album of his music. There is a Louis Vierne piece in there, too, but even so. Franck often has his foot heavily down on the fortissimo pedal, too often and for too long for my taste. So they're good renditions of music that really are kind of, it's not rough going. It's just like, oh man, just calm down a little bit, you know? 2 hours of fortissimo is rather hard.
Yeah, I've listened to Trio Wanderer for quite a few years now. They've got a pretty good recording catalog, and I'm always in kind of trio mode in the spring. I don't know why, but I always go back and listen to some of their recordings and see if they've got something
a good trio.
And yeah, I liked all these performances. Let's see. Of course, I know the quintet, Franck's quintet, quite well. And of course, the violin sonata. I've got quite a few recordings of that. Yeah. And the Vierne was new to me, and also the final Franck trio. I don't think I've heard that before. So that was kind of interesting to hear that. I enjoyed all the performances. As you say, Franck's music is a bit exhausting.
It certainly is.
So I listened to it all on one day, too. And I kind of, listening to each CD on a different day would have been a little bit better just because of the nature of the intensity. But I've always found in their other recordings, too, that they give a very measured and musical approach to most, a lot of romantic recordings they've done. And that's kind of their approach in general, which I usually find enjoyable. I can follow all of the lines in the piano quite well in their recordings.
He's a good pianist, Vincent Clark. He's really good.
Very clear and measured approach, but musical at the same time. And I found that here in general. As you say, it's hard to compete with all of the violin sonata recordings that are out there. And it would have been interesting to hear the other Franck works, but maybe they'll be coming out also on a different recording too. So we'll to see. But anyway, I always enjoy Trio Wanderer. So it was nice to have this. And do check out some of their other previous recordings.
Yeah. Here I am saying, it's a little too much intensity for me to this two-disc set, and then I say,
I want more.
I want the other two piano trios too. It's like that Woody Allen joke, how life is just full of misery and suffering, and it's over way too soon. You just want both.
Yeah.
Right, anyway, my last pick for this week is a contemporary composer. I'm going to get back to these in a big way, I think, in coming weeks. Although, next week too. We got this too. This is music by Roberto Sierra. He's Puerto Rican, and this is his Symphony No. 6, Sinfonietta for string orchestra, 2 pieces for orchestra, Fandangos and Alegria, played by the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Domingo Hindoyan, and this is on the Onyx label. So this album presents music from Sierra's entire career. A common element in his music is the use of idioms that stem from Afro-Caribbean music, and more specifically from the folk and popular music of Puerto Rico. All right. Now, whenever we get music from the Americas, whether it's from the United States or from the Hispanic parts of America, you had mentioned this to me this week, actually, Russ. It's more groove-oriented than European music. It's really funny. Right. The Americas are groove-oriented, and Europe is more kind of, I don't know what we'd call it, a melodic, I'd say, or maybe theme-based or structured or harmonic or something, harmonically structured, things like that. But the groove puts across a lot, and you really need to get that groove right. And it seems that the best orchestras for that kind of music are orchestras from the Americas.
Yeah.
So, but we'll get to that a little later. Here we have an English orchestra, the Royal Liverpool, playing this, and they're a fantastic orchestra. But let's get into this. Track 1, Alegria. This is a short piece. Roberto Sierra writes the notes, and they're very helpful. Many pieces from the Caribbean, Central, and South America that express a playful and joyous mood are in 6/8 meter, as is this piece. And this is Sierra talking. This opens with an explosive circling fiesta of a pattern, heavy on rhythm and harmonies and thematic material that we associate with Hispanic orchestral music of the past. There are even some humorous trombone glissandos in there. Okay. The middle section quiets down, yet is still full of festive fanfares. There's a lot of wind and brass in the orchestration, and the RLPO captures the rhythms well, if not entirely idiomatically. Now, when I say idiomatically, I'm talking about that groove. The rapid repeated notes are a bit dynamically too precise for me, and to me, they would be like moving the rhythm forward if you kind of played them in a groove fashion. But the layered writing adds more magical Latin texture to constantly beguile the ear. I especially enjoyed the pulling back and approach to the end of the piece in the last 40 seconds, and the work ends on a big final chord. Now, the work has a lot of rhythmic layers to it, and the orchestra and the conductor approach this with great precision, and that's important. All the lines stand out really well, and you could hear them. I just wish they would have that more kind of Latin American groove to them, but I really can't complain. This actually sounds like very complicated music, and it's really well put across here, let's say. Tracks 2 and 3, Dos Piezas para Orquesta, from 2017. The first one, Combo un Lament, starts solemn, somber, and has an almost processional character to it. It contrasts right away with the opening piece, and what draws my ear is the layering of separate lines in different sections of the orchestral. This is one of Sierra's techniques, and I like it a lot. At 1 minute and 32 seconds, there's a sudden lamenting decrescendo with the strings playing sustained harmonies and some percussive and wind section details peeking out occasionally. There are quick rhythmic outbursts in the 3rd minute that disappear and calm to a soft clarinet melody, blending with the sustained string texture. Distant fanfares are heard at 4:40, and the dynamic suddenly amplifies to feature foreboding timpani hits. The piece ends on mysterious sustained chords that drop out at the end. The second piece, marked Animando, contrasts with the first one. It's agitated and exuberant. It starts with the agitated material, which decrescendos to a new, still agitated section at about 30 seconds. Distant agitated fanfares are heard in the 2nd minute over percussion and tremolo string textures. The piece has a rushing, anxious quality at this point. We hear another new section just after the 4-minute mark. There's some satisfying brass in this section, playing out and carrying the chords at one point. The climax results in a haunting string harmony that accompanies a crescendo by the rest of the orchestra to the ending, which doesn't feel like it's released all that tension. Tracks 4 through 7 are a Sinfonietta for string orchestra. This was written in 2020 during the early days of the COVID pandemic. The first movement, marked ritmico, is in sonata allegro form. The intro has an angular rhythm and thematic line. The main section starts seconds after this. It features rushing string accompaniment over these more angular themes. Pizzicati are heard in accompaniment shortly afterward. They take over the theme as the upper strings play circling patterns. New patterns materialize pretty quickly in this movement, so I can't really articulate them all. Just, let's say, Sierra packs a lot of ideas into his works and into this movement. He's also got a lot of ideas for changing the sounds of the strings. We're hearing only string instruments, yet he gets a lot of timbres out of them, a lot of different string techniques to make the sound palette really interesting. As the second minute is reached, we hear a more romantic theme, but this quickly morphs into a more aggressive line with crisp pizzicati acting as accents. By 3:20, we're back to the opening material after an eventful development section. At 3:30, we hear what I think is an accompanimental pattern played on the bridges of the instruments, melodic material flying by in the upper strings. It's a really cool sound, the overall sound that he gets here. As the quiet ending is reached, we also hear the strings being struck with the bows. A lot of effects were used in this movement. Second movement, Expressivo, features the Puerto Rican danza, a popular piano genre during the 19th century. And in fact, we've heard danzas on this podcast before in some of the jazz recordings that we did in the more Latin-sounding albums. I can't remember which ones now, though. Anyway, pizzicato accompaniment over the melting string theme above. There's a lot of quick textural changes in this movement too, as though each section is a quick variation on orchestrating and harmonizing the melody. There's a droning accompaniment with low vibrato-less strings taking the theme at 1:45. Bows head toward the bridge for a more ghostly sound as the music goes on. Then at 2:48, we get a straightforward romantic 19th century style theme, straightforwardly played. The unison statement at about 2:20 grabs the ear before dissolving into quieter, mistier harmonies. Cellos play fragments of the theme as the ensemble does a natural fade to end the movement. This is really beautifully executed, this movement. The third movement is marked Vivo, pizzicato heavy movement, and brief at less than 2 minutes. The rhythm is lively, and pizzicati are accented by occasional bow strikes on the strings. Just after the 1 minute mark, we hear contrasting sustained vibrato-less chords, then the pizzicati return for the mysterious ending. The fourth movement, marked Rapido, has the work closing as it started. A quick circling rhythm accompanies the scurrying theme. At around 1:15, the theme suddenly changes to a walking accompaniment in the bass as the violins play a melodic theme. A rolling rhythmic pattern starts up at 1:55 and ends at 2:12. A solo violin starts a theme that is soon accompanied by imitative fugato patterns. This dries up and the violin plays quick thematic patterns over pizzicati strings. I like the brief droning string effect with pizzicati and the violins about halfway through the third minute. Syncopated melodic material leads to the circling patterns that end the piece. Track 8 was a little unusual. It's called Fandangos, and it was composed in the year 2000. And Sierra tells us in his notes the point of departure for this work was Antonio Soler's famous Fandango for harpsichord, a piece I know pretty well. Sierra also includes the incorporation of elements from Boccherini's and Domenico Scarlatti's respective Fandangos, neither of which I know very well, so I wasn't really sure where they came in. But I did hear the Cellar really throughout almost. There are also some Baroque musings from Sierra himself. Music from the past blends with the present in a continuum of constant harmonic, melodic, and timbral variations. This piece has a really old world feel to it, something more elegant than the world we live in now, despite a few more modern orchestral touches. Once the melodies start, we're in the past. For the first fandango, there's staccato brass accompaniment, an interesting touch. The orchestration will sometimes play up the more Baroque profile of the melodic material, but the orchestration and harmony often lands this piece in the 20th century. There are even castanets toward the end of the first minute. I have to say, the fandango resembling Soler's at the beginning of the second minute doesn't have the constantly building momentum that his has, but I'm guessing at least part of that is intentional. The themes are often broken up by modern orchestration and harmony. The pacing of the work does seem a bit slow and measured in tempo. The orchestration is extremely modern sounding at the 5th minute, then snaps back to the Cellar Fandango pattern with ghostly sounds from the orchestra accompanying. More compelling orchestral timbres without the driving rhythm are heard after 6:30 and at 7:11, after which the Fandango rhythm and theme return. In the end, I think this performance comes across as too carefully rendered, though the orchestra is expertly balanced. The Fandango themes tend to march more often than dance. I think a wilder quality is called for. It's an interesting piece, though, full of familiar material, juxtaposed with modern orchestral textures. Now, I think the Fandango it was imported from the Americas to Spain, but it was done in Spain too. And I felt like they should have put this rhythm across with more excitement anyway in this piece. It's a nicely performed piece, though. You can hear the orchestral textures all very clearly. So it's good for that reason. Tracks 9 through 12 are the Sinfonia number 6, written in 2020 to 2021. So the conductor, Domingo Hindoyan, commissioned this in a program that would feature Beethoven's 9th Symphony, and Sierra replied to him that if he wrote a companion symphony to Beethoven's 9th, it would be his 6th, and he'd have to make it a pastoral symphony since Beethoven made his 6th symphony a pastoral symphony. It was a joke, but the idea started to take hold, as they often do. So the symphony has programmatic content. I don't know, programmatic, but not really a narrative, let's say. The first movement is marked Memoria Urbana, and Sierra says this contains the pulse and vitality of city life. The opening comes across as busy and sophisticated. There's a rushing quality to the rhythm, especially after the 30-second mark where we hear the rapid string propulsion in the accompaniment. At the 1-minute mark, this busyness breaks up and we get a quieter, more nocturnal theme, making me think of being in a well-furnished apartment on the upper floor looking out at the city. The rhythm that follows has a Latin feel to it in its propulsion. At 7:20, I believe that's a xylophone in the accompaniment. You don't really hear enough of those. Did you think so? Do you remember this?
Oh, there's xylophone on this recording all over the place, yeah.
Yeah, but there's a marimba too, I think.
There's marimba in the next track, I believe.
Right. Yeah, okay. So I sometimes have trouble telling the two apart because I just don't hear the xylophone enough. But the xylophone, the way I think of it, has a more bony sound, whereas the marimba sort of rings a lot. This section slowly evaporates, the xylophone part, leading to something more urgent after the 3-minute mark. I liked the brass and percussion texture at 3:45. The brass with a really cool attack accented by a hand drum. At 4:32, a Latin-sounding rhythm with a pause in it comes through. Percussion is always heard in the distance, like there's like some party going on, sort of not too far away. At the end of the movement, the strings drift downwards and a repeating flute pattern ends the movement slowly. Track 2 is labeled De Noche, and Sierra comments, the magical nights of the tropics with the infinite starry skies and sounds of the fauna inspired this movement. And this one has a marimba at the beginning and winds evoking bird songs. This section is atmospheric, and the movement seems to evoke distant goings-on heard from a quiet place. Third movement, Huracan, or hurricane, I guess. The inspiration was the terrifying natural forces of the tropics. A sudden change as we get a buildup of rolling material. This would be the Beethovenian storm of this pastoral symphony, if we're thinking of it that way. The storm's approach is majestically announced by brass toward the end of the first minute. Then syncopated, accented chords urgently call out. There are trombone glissandos that give a sense of instability and unpredictability. Then a crystalline harmony is heard at 1:38. A quiet section of marching strings and fluttering winds follows. More turbulent material follows, then a gentle atmospheric section at 3:38 leads to the final stormy disturbance that ends the movement. And the finale, track movement 4, the last track on the album, which is track 12, is a celebration of the rhythms of the Caribbean. It starts with percussion, and very satisfyingly so. It sets a tropical atmosphere. Again, the strings and winds play quietly, giving the sense of sound being carried on the wind from far away. The rhythms are piled onto one another, and again, come across as precisely played, so beautifully layered, and the orchestra does well to sort of have them stand out. But again, it takes away from the thrust and excitement contained in them. I feel like this movement is almost like a mirror of the first piece that we heard on the album. It's a similar idea. They're all immediately appealing, all of these rhythms or themes that are going on at the same time. There's a cool ear-catching texture after 3:15 with percussion and winds that I really wished had lasted longer, but the rhythms all crowd in and interrupt each other as we would hear if we were in the Caribbean. The changes of rhythm seem to come more quickly as the piece goes on. There's a chiming, atmospheric accompaniment to the distant reeds at 6:30, just before the final crescendo brings us to a rousing, rhythm-filled ending. Okay, so this is an album full of Latin color, and the Liverpool Philharmonic do well to put those colors across. The timbres are really vivid on this album. The pieces have lots of Latin rhythms and colorful orchestration as well. We're talking about the kind of rhythms an orchestra can produce. So there's no salsa in this, none of that kind of thing. Right? It's more old school, old school rhythms, like you would have heard on popular music recordings from, say, the 1950s or so. I thought the orchestra were better in the more formal Sinfonia and Sinfonietta than in the more rhythmically fueled Fandangos and Alegria, and of course the last movement of the Sinfonia too. I felt like those are more groove-oriented movements, and I would have liked to have heard those done, say, by an American orchestra who really does naturally feel those grooves. Although then you wonder if you're going to get the really high quality like playing of the different sort of levels and textures of the different layers of the piece. Anyway, on this album, the character of all the pieces is put across. It's a composer whose appealing melodic and rhythmic sense is attractive on a first listen. I would urge you to hear it. I feel like there's a lot more excitement in this music, though, than comes across in this album, but it's still, these pieces come across well here.
It's rhythmic, exciting, instantly appealing music. You'll have a lot of fun getting into the rhythmic elements, and the melodies are all really attractive as well. I really enjoy the orchestration.
Yeah, me too.
He uses the full palette of the orchestra, especially good low brass parts, interesting percussion. At some points, you'll get kind of the Leonard Bernstein, what he was going for with a West Side Story kind of thing. Those rhythms come out. And it's a good performance. I would like to hear some of this music performed by a Latin American ensemble orchestra, just to hear how, players who are culturally brought up with those rhythms would sort of interpret this, and maybe, as you say, bring a little bit more rhythmic intensity, authenticity to it. But it's a fine performance here as well. I enjoyed his music.
Yeah, I just want to mention what I'm thinking of there. That Mozart y Mambo album by Sarah Willis.
Right.
Yeah, she recorded that with Cuban orchestras,
right? Yeah.
And when they got to the more kind of Latin sounding, like they arranged like Mozart as like a Latin piece, and man, did that move! I mean, they were just right on top of it. It was great. I would have liked to have heard that sort of approach to this music. And, not that I don't want to complain about this. This is very good, but I'd like to hear his music played in that way and see what it sounds like. What comes out.
Yeah, but definitely an exciting project, composer.
Roberto. Yeah, it's exciting composer. I'd say so too.
I'd like to hear more.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, I just wanted the last word is to Mr. Sierra, Maestro Sierra. I like him as a composer. So more, please.
Yeah.
Get some more recordings. This is really good.
Okay, moving on to the jazz portion of the program. We're going to have a lot of original music this week, which I like, but I always get obsessed. I want to figure out all the compositions, When you get some standards, you can sort of sit back a bit and just focus on the interpretation or what's new with it. But we're going to have a lot of exciting new compositions on all these recordings, a few standards mixed in as well. I'm going to start out with a piano trio up to quintet, and it's by pianist Keigo Hirakawa. The recording is Pixel. It's on Origin Records, and it was released on June 16th. Now, who is Keigo Hirakawa? Well, he's a pianist born in Tokyo. He started playing piano at age 4. He moved to the U.S., Ohio to be specific, at age 11. I think that would make him around 44 years old now. He went to a summer jazz camp after junior high school when playing saxophone. Then he returned to playing piano after getting hooked on jazz music. But he ended up pursuing a career in engineering, still developing his music skills and attending the New England Conservatory as a master's student while working to complete his engineering PhD dissertation.
How do people do that?
I don't know. He became an electrical and computer engineering professor in Ohio, but in music and jazz, he has 7 full-length album appearances, 3 as a leader. You can find his previous trio recording from 2015 on streaming services. It's called And Then There Were 3. So on this recording, we've got Keigo Hirakawa on piano, all compositions except for one, Raphael Staton on saxophones, flute, and bass clarinet, Brandon Scott Coleman on guitar, Robert Hurst on bass, and Alex White on drums. You're going to start right out with the title track for track 1, Pixel, and this one builds up from a 4-measure pattern of spaced-out right-hand piano chords and cool skittering left-hand bass lines. The second time around, Hurst's bass joins in with that left-hand bass, and White sneaks in with hi-hat and other light drumming. Coleman adds some spongy, chorusy guitar chords and then works a sparsely phrased lead line with Staton's sax as the rhythm section pattern continues below. There's 2 8-measure sections of that kind of an A section, then a contrasting B section with more jangly guitar and legato sax. That repeats, and the bass starts to take on a kind of pulsing samba feel to it. Then back to the intro figure for 2 rounds to set up Hurst for a busy bass solo. He's really driving it with strong attacks. And Staton follows with a husky and edgy-toned tenor solo, working up to angsty cries, and Hurst returns to that throbbing bass line. Coleman gets a guitar solo next, and he has one of those real fusion-type tones here that cuts right through all of the ensemble with some interesting rhythmic phrasing. And Hirakawa solos last with fast, fluid right-hand running lines and punchy left-hand chords. And he changes directions quickly in his solo lines. He gets more rhythmic as he pushes on. They bring back the playing to the intro idea, this time with more ringing guitar from Coleman, once more through the melody, and they close it out with that intro idea with some tight fills from White's drums underneath. It's an exciting tune to get things started.
Yeah, Hirakawa seems to like that running line for his solos. He does that on a lot of the tracks on this album, not all of them. Yeah, but and then the ideas kind of like, I guess, flow out of that.
Flow out of that line, yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting approach.
Track 2 is called Far Above, and it starts with an 8-bar intro of bass and piano playing cute loping lines that end in big rising intervals. Staton on soprano sax with Coleman's cleaner toned guitar here take the happy melody together. It's an AAB type pattern. They repeat it, but the second time the guitar answers the sax phrases on the A section. Coleman continues on with a long guitar solo, clean toned with more nice melodic ideas and phrasing. Hurst and White have a good evolving drum and bass groove going on underneath, and Hirakawa follows with a solo of happy lines with relaxed phrasing, sometimes taking a few unexpected harmonic turns. They take it through the melody sections again, and then it's Staton's time for a soprano solo, and he milks a soulful riff for a bit, and then gets into some reaching and screeching, climbing in some microtonal increments to heartfelt high squawks.
Wow.
Imagine squeezing a goose under your arm and pulling its neck to get the high notes out. That's what it's like. Wow. He joins back with Coleman for some final melody measures to finish it up. Track 3 is called Home Somewhere. This tune is in a slow 3-beat feel, but starts out with an intro of really cool doubled-up syncopated solo bass from Hurst. White adds some dancing cymbals and Hirakawa some chiming piano before Coleman and Staton come in with the flowing melody lines. The structure is a little different. There's a repeating 8-measure A section, a contrasting 8-measure B section, which sounds like it's going to repeat, but it takes a different harmonic turn in the 4th measure to end early on the 7th measure, so it's like a 31-measure construction. Coleman's up first for a guitar solo, clean tone with a bit of edge, And Hurst is doing all kinds of bouncy bass things right through and varies things interestingly under the solo. Nice cymbal work and little fills from White. And Coleman works up to some searing high guitar lines with bite on this one. The rhythm feel works up into an intense Latin-y 3-beat groove and then softens for Hirakawa to start a piano solo. He sounds springy in touch on this one, mixing things up with some descending chord ideas before getting more intense and speedy as the throbbing beat builds back up. He connects the lines nicely towards the end. Statton's next with a sultry soprano solo working up from the warm lower register to some cool harmonic exploration and descending shrieks before a soft ending. They give it a little soft reset for another run through the melody, and after a ringing guitar chord, piano, bass, and drums continue for White to get some time to work around the drum kit with intense drumming into a return of the opening bass figure from Hurst and some soft soprano sax tones on top from Statton, and it fades out. Track 4, my favorite composition here, Origami Beetle.
I like this one too.
It's a very cool rhythmic tune. It starts with a pattern of piano chords with bass, 4 repeating chords, and a final one. The beats will be offset, but you can count it in 4 or 8. And if you go for the double time, you're going to get 8 measures of that. And then you'll be prepared for the angular sax and guitar melody that comes in on top, which actually forms a doubled up 12-bar minor blues construction that repeats. So it's like a kind of condensed blues form. And over that rhythm, it's a very interesting effect. It's very cool. Hirakawa starts soloing over the rhythm pattern there for 2 times around, and then they change it up and then into a fast swing at the doubled up tempo idea with chugging walking bass from Hurst. Hirakawa's got a nice flow going here with smooth lines of lots of ideas and harmonic exploration and percussive chords. He continues on with more zippy lines and rhythmic figures, and they bring back the opening rhythm for Statton to get started on a tenor solo. Hurst mixes up the bass a bit as Hirakawa drops out to let Statton blow freely, and Hurst gets it chugging again. Statton keeps things pushing forward with rhythmic licks, low and high bursts, and some Pharoah Sanders soundscapes working up to high shrieks here. They bring it back to the intro into another couple times through the melody to wrap it up. And there's some small vocal reactions are left at the end of the track between the players. Track 5 is Unmarked Path, another rhythmically exciting tune. There's a 16-measure intro of syncopated piano right-hand figures and chords and chasing left-hand piano and bass lines that sometimes intersect. You can count it in a slow 3 to get ready for the melody. It's played by, I think, flute and then soprano sax and guitar, although the notes for the recording say bass clarinet on this track. I don't hear it. It's 32 measures of melody, an 8-measure softly flowing section that repeats with some rhythmic variation in the lines, and the second 16 measures switches to the melody lines outlined in the piano intro that we heard before, with the soprano sax going up higher, nice drum fills added by White. Coleman's up first for a guitar solo, more of a biting tone here, nice use of repetition in his ideas, and check out the very cool muted descending lines that he rips out in this one. He's a real guitar chameleon. He changes the kind of shape of tones and approach for each tune on this recording. They open the beat up a bit for Hirakawa to get started on his solo, and then get a new groove going with nice cymbal work from White. And Hirakawa ties long lines together, gets some speedy runs in as well in a long solo. Thick guitar and backing lines float in, and Coleman works up an interesting choppy interval backing line, and they take it through the melody sections again and finish up on a final rising line of notes. Track 6, called Yaw Pitch Roll. Statton sits out on this trio tune. The structure is made up of a little swinging solo piano phrase that moves into some syncopated chords of moving modal harmony that the bass and drums lock in with hits on. That's an 8-measure phrase that repeats. Then there's a 12-measure section that chugs along with walking bass for improvised piano lines. They do that 8-8-12 pattern once more, and Hirakawa makes a final quote of the phrase before he's off and running on an extended solo that highlights his smooth phrasing, and he works up to some speedy double time playing too. Hurst gets a bass solo with ringing tone that turns a bit rhythmic and snappy on the way, and White gets to trade some 8s and then 4s with Hirakawa. They get back to the melody for the ending, but with a little twist. Over the 12-measure section, Hirakawa lets some pretty high chimes ring out before the last swinging phrase and then a few more piano trickles. Track 7 is Dreaming Awake, and this is an original by Brandon Scott Coleman, the guitarist, who starts it out solo and rubato with a dreamy, reverby intro of a melody line, moving bass line, and chords all on the guitar with a little touch of tremolo in there. The others join in with a very slow 4-beat tempo. And here's Stetton's bass clarinet, working the legato melody line with Coleman's guitar. It's very pretty with nice harmonies. There's a 12-measure phrase, and then it seems like it's going to repeat, but there are 4 more measures diverting into a little dissonance. Pretty trickles of notes from Hirakawa decorate it, and Stetton carries on with a bass clarinet solo. He starts relaxed and becomes more animated. It's interesting how his tone is more sax-like higher up in the range, but then gets that full bass clarinet tonality when he plays down low. Coleman has a guitar solo with clean attacks and little harmonic tensions, and Hirakawa has a solo of flowing lines with guitar and sax melody lines building underneath to a soft finish. It's very pretty and dreamy, like the title suggests. And the recording ends up with another Hirakawa original, Change of Plans, and it's aptly titled. There are lots of changes as this one gets going. Drums and Stetton's tenor sax start out, joined by choppy muted guitar notes from Coleman. Piano and bass join in with some cool synced up bass lines and chords, stop and go backing, and brief charges of walking bass. Swing and change-ups to waltzing phrases come in. Stetton gets a tenor solo first. It swings with walking bass, but then some change-ups to a Latin feel. And Stetton gets his Pharoah Sanders-esque shrieks out in this one as well. Coleman follows on guitar, starting out with and working back to his cool muted ideas that he comes up with along the way. And Hirakawa has an energetic solo driving through swinging and Latin feels with smoothly phrased lines and a few rhythmically tricky licks thrown in as well. They vamp around for a while to give White some drum frenzy time, and then Stetton returns for some melodic lines into the waltzing feel for a soft ending. So it's an enjoyable recording of all original music. I liked Hirakawa's compositions a lot. They're fresh and interesting, especially Origami Beetle was unique. His piano solos are energetic and he has a good sense of swing and nicely connected long smooth phrasing. Stetton's reed playing is exciting and diverse with that goosey soprano, muscular and gruff tenor, and the bass clarinet for more deep color. And Coleman's guitar work is eclectic and he finds something new to do on every tune with customized tone and phrasing. Hurst and White are tight and punchy on bass and drums. It's a very well engineered recording from a man of obviously many talents.
Yeah, did he engineer it himself?
No, but he's an engineer, so
I see. I was going to say, that's quite a thing. Hey, I actually said a lot of the same things you did. I thought this album was really breezy and uplifting in a nice way, and it's mostly major key. It just really feels good. Hirakawa, he's an interesting pianist. I feel like he's unique in the way he'll play these continuing lines with no pauses. Not always, but on most of the tracks. And it seems like he could just keep that going forever and just kind of just keep playing.
Perpetual,
Yeah, he's got this, amazing ability there. And the raw sax tone, like you said, I thought that was a good foil. Because, again, I'm thinking about contrast from my classical kind of way of listening. He's a good foil for Hirakawa's smooth, cheerful playings. He was very different in tone. Yeah, I thought the other soloists had a lot of room to provide contrast because of the way Hirakawa plays, and they all did that. And it was good. Yeah, It's an uplifting one. It's kind of like the jazz equivalent of the the Calcutta 1789 album that we were talking about earlier. Maybe not for the early morning, but maybe ending the day with this one.
It's a kind of a unique atmosphere to it with rhythms, unique compositions, and then these distinctive soloist personalities coming out in it. So definitely I'm going to go back, and I've sampled a few of his earlier recordings, but want to hear some more.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Yeah.
Another interesting recording for our second one. This is from saxophonist Clark Gibson. It's called Counterclock. It's on Cellar Live. This also came out on June 16th. Clark Gibson's a jazz saxophonist, composer, and the director of education at the Nash in Phoenix, Arizona, which is a concert jazz club, but it's more than that. They have education programs, and it seems like a kind of center for music there. Clark received his Bachelor of Music in Jazz at Cornish College of the Arts in Seattle. His first independently released CD was called The Offering. Also in 2010, he recorded a second album, Iapetus. From 2012 to 2015, he completed his master's and doctoral degree at the University of Illinois. During this time, he recorded a third album as a leader, self-titled as Old Style Sextet. And 2015, he released Charlie Parker with Strings, The Lost Arrangements. And his previous recording to this one, we're going to hear tonight, is Tricolored Eyes in 2019. Now, the description of this recording says, Counterclock refers to looking back and not discounting art you created in your early stages as an artist. Gibson has come to embrace and celebrate his compositions from yesteryear.
I am so on board with that idea.
But looking at his previous albums, I didn't notice these tunes have been recorded before. So I don't know if they were just tunes that he wrote and had around and was unsure of, or he's performed them for years. But anyway, they're all very interesting.
I thought so too. This one sort of stood out for me this week.
Yeah.
I think this is the standout album.
Because we've got some monster players along with Gibson. So Gibson's mainly an alto saxophonist, but he also plays Barry on one track here. We've got the amazing Sean Jones on trumpet and Michael Deese, also Mr. Amazing on trombone, and he's on Barry sax on this one. We've heard him do Barry before, but he's getting some really good Barry chops, which we'll talk about when we get to it. And the always great Pat Bianchi on the Hammond B3 organ, and I believe piano too, although it's not in the credits. There's a little bit of piano in here. Louis Nash is on drums, and we're joined on a few tracks, well, more than a few, maybe 5 tracks, by vibraphonist Nick Mancini. So we're going to start out with Conflict for track 1, a Gibson original composition. It's an exciting modal tune to get things going. Nash and Bianchi get it started with an 8-bar intro with swinging, dancing cymbal and very syncopated, offbeat, repeated organ chords. The horns pick up into short phrases over the intro rhythm idea for an 8-measure section. The harmony changes for another round of that same idea. And then there's a section of swinging smooth horn lines into drum fills for 7 measures. Those 3 sections repeat. And then there's a new 20-measure section of swelling, rising, and falling horn and organ lines over drum fills. Bianchi gets the intro groove going again to set up Gibson for a solo, but gets to a great swinging groove with walking organ bass and punchy chords. Gibson swings hard in his solo with fluid lines. His tone is interesting, with a rich center to the tone, but sometimes a nice edge. Some cool triplet lines mixed in and nice accents in his phrasing. There's another reset to the groove for Deese to step up, and he impresses with his fast and tricky slide work as usual, and some fun rhythmic licks. And Sean Jones follows with a nicely building solo, really navigating the changing harmonies and working up to a scream. I think I can hear a lot of Woody Shaw's harmonic influence in his ideas on this tune. One more organ reset, and then they play through all the melody sections again with a little slowdown into the final hold. It's an interesting tune and very intense solos to get started. Track 2, Gibson's original, the title track, Counterclock, a medium swinging tune. The horns have a harmonized melody arrangement that has 2 10-measure sections. Jones's trumpet is in the lead for the first half, and then Deese's trombone swells more in the second section before the trumpet rises above the bone and sax lines. A pressing drum roll brings in Gibson for an alto sax solo first. Bianchi has a good groove settled in, and Gibson builds up from shorter lines of ideas with relaxed phrasing, but scoopy kind of articulation. There's some fun chord changes to navigate in this tune. Jones follows on trumpet, building up a great solo on this one. Some bluesy ideas, interesting intervals in his lines, and descending sequences, and then really squeezing out some high notes again on this one. It sounds like someone lets out a call or something when he finishes his solo in there. Bianchi gets a solo next. Starting out with spaced out ideas with clear attack and building up to some cool high register licks and trills. The horns add smooth backing lines and come back with the melody sections. The end of the second section gets extended for Nash to do some drumming over the organ, and then the horns return to finish it all up. Track 3, Parting Place. Nick Mancini is in on vibes on this one, and he gets to start it out on his own. Shimmering zips of notes go from right to left channel as it's panned according to the range of the instrument. Then there's more placid and pulsing tones. Then soft vibes and organ get a very unique slow bossa beat groove going, which is joined by Nash. Jones takes the melody solo. Sounds like he's on flugelhorn here with a big fluffy tone. It's lush. Harmonic backing with the vibes, organ, and soft sax and trombone lines coming in. I'm not sure about the structure here. It seems to be about a 40-measure melody, but there are nice rhythmic change-ups of hesitation and accents that come in on the 13th measure, and then they come again towards the end of the melody. Things quiet down for a bit of space before Jones starts an improvised solo. He plays restrained and very tastily. Nash and Bianchi have such a relaxed groove going underneath, and then Deese follows. He sounds great with a little pitch play and some tasty vibrato, and then gets more rhythmic. Bianchi solos next with fun hesitated phrases, and Mancini lets some soft vibes chords ring out for backing. Things drop away just to the ghostly vibe vamp to make a reset before drums and organ join in to bring Jones back in on the melody to a minor chord ending. Track 4, Tunisia. Very sparse 8-measure opening with a syncopated dark minor organ line and bass notes and light drumming. Drums fill the phrase gaps. It repeats, and then Mancini comes in with some bluesy vibes for a melody. Trombone and sax get soft low lines, building up to Jones joining in with a higher trumpet line. Mancini is playing along with the horns, and Nash gets fills in between the phrase gaps. The beat gets tricky with some Latin-y shifts as it goes along. Mancini gets a break into a vibe solo, and Bianchi gets a loping organ bass line going underneath and punchy minor backing chords. Gibson has a suave and bluesy solo, starting out in the low register, and then some snappy licks with more scoopy phrasing. Bianchi follows with an organ solo, a great relaxed feel to start out, and he gets into more of a frenzy and holds out a long trill that builds up the tension until you just can't stand it anymore. And the chords are really cool that he plays right before the horns join back in with some backing into more melody lines from before, but with a mushier kind of execution. Nash gets some fills over the original vamp before Bianchi finishes it up quietly. Then we're going to get our one non-original tune, George Gershwin's Embraceable You, and this is actually not part of this studio set, but it was recorded live at Lowdown Jazz Club in Tulsa, Oklahoma, March 4th, 2022. And it's a great sounding live number here. Gibson starts it out with an improvised solo working around the harmonies of this standard tune. He mixes in fluttery phrases, bluesy licks, and little bits of melody so you can keep your place in the progression. Organ and drums come in for the official melody start, and Gibson adds in tasty filling licks between phrases. He gets a little cadenza at the end of the tune too. Tasty stuff, and the crowd really loves it. I love to hear crowds go wild for a ballad that's played just beautifully. That's always nice.
Yeah.
Now back to original tune, but this time from Nick Mancini, arranged by Clark Gibson. Oates is back. Nash's drum roll and hit bring it in to get the horns going on a loping, swinging melody. There's a repeating 8-measure section of horn arrangement. Then Jones, Deese, and Gibson get to take lead on shorter 4-measure sections in turn before all joining together for another 8-measure section. Gibson solos first over a soft, halting groove by Bianchi and Nash. Jones follows, and then Deese with some really slick slide work. Gibson and Jones have some shorter exchanges, getting more animated, and then Mancini and Bianchi get some solo exchanges with soft horn line backing, and they pick it up from the traded off short melody sections we heard earlier, starting with Jones, then Deese and Gibson to take it to the end.
By the way, did we find out who Oates is?
I don't know.
Okay, we're gonna have to ask the ensemble there if you guys are listening.
It could be.
Who's Oates?
Yeah,
Write to
Oates?
us.
I don't know. Could be Warren Oates, the great character actor. Yeah.
Yeah, this. By the way, this next track put this album over the top for me. It was a really great ending.
Icing on the cake.
Yeah.
back to a Gibson original Baptude.
Yeah, this was great.
And a big contrast with a fast tempo for the last tune. A drum hit gets an 8-measure intro of vibes and organ, chord exchanges going. The horns join in on the vamp idea for once around and then launch off on a fast boppy AABA melody construction. That's Gibson and Deese, both on Barry sax here. And check out the cool Barry lines on the contrasting B section of the melody.
Yeah, this was so awesome. Yeah. The two baritone saxes playing like this was just great.
Yeah. They get back to the intro vamp section to build up tension for a solo break, and then it's time for a Barry battle between Gibson and Deese.
Yeah, this
the licks
is great.
are hot and fast as the phrases get shorter, and then they join in together for the end until the final foghorn note that results there. It's so much fun. Mancini follows on vibes, and he sounds like he's had a few espressos with all this speedy mallet work going on. Stay out of the way. There's lots of felt flying there. Jones gets some zippy, boppy 8-bar solo exchanges with Nash, which turn into 4 measures and then end up playing together. Everyone is back for another run through the melody. The vamp and a final line of the melody start into a big finish. A great, fun ending track.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to enjoy on this recording. First, Gibson's compositions are engaging and unique. Lots of variety of style, structures, rhythms, and moods. The arrangements have a lot of tonal richness, and with the 3-horn lineup over Bianchi's organ and bass work, even a little bit of piano thrown in there. And then there's the addition of Mancini's vibes, which give a lot of atmosphere. Then, of course, the soloing. Gibson's alto tone is rich, and his solos are energetic and creative, drawing on the bebop and post-bop legacy. I can hear hints of Cannonball Adderley, Phil Woods in his style. Sean Jones's solos here are exciting and adventurous, and Michael Deese is always exciting and technically amazing. Gibson and Deese's Barry battle on Baptude is the icing on the cake for all the great horn solos. Yeah. And Bianchi has some good solo spots, but mostly he's really making these tunes happen with great bass lines, perfectly chosen organ tones that match each tune's atmosphere, and locks in really well with Nash's drums.
Yeah, for me, it was like the final track on the album, Baptude, with its smoking playing from everyone. That really grabbed my attention. But I did like all of the album. I thought, Harding Place, Tunisia, Oates is Back were moody and atmospheric. I really appreciated Pat Bianchi's subtle accompanimental contribution to both tracks with his sound and approach. I named 3 tracks, but anyway, I did like that. The entire album. Yeah, it's an enjoyable album. There's a long kind of... In the middle of the album, there are a lot of down-tempo tracks, like they're atmospheric and even sexy. I was thinking like the rhythm on Counterclock and Oates is Back. I kind of found them to be really sexy sounding. And I'm really glad they put Baptude last. Otherwise, I would have been thinking about that for the entire rest of the album, and I just wouldn't have heard it. So, good programming there, too. Yeah. This one, I might want to get this one. This sounds good.
Yeah, it was enjoyable. And I saved the biggest for the last. We're going to go big band here. Also out on June 16th. All these recordings came out on the same day. And this is the new one from Stephen Feifke, Catalyst, on La Reserve Records.
We're big fans of his here.
Yeah, big fans, because we first heard Feifke on his Kinetic recording. That was back in episode 11, which was called Killer Bees, Bach, Busoni, Bruckner, and Big Band. And that recording made our best of 2021 jazz list as well. Then we heard Prologue in episode 34, Big Band Booze Up. And I think that was actually recorded before
one
Kinetic.
of our better titles, I have to say.
Yeah, in 2019. And then, of course, we heard the Grammy-winning Generation Gap Jazz Orchestra in episode 83, Beefy Beethoven and Big Band. So we've been following all of Stephen Feifke's releases, and he's had more in there, too. He had a piano trio release. And actually, this is his 6th album release in 2 years. He's got to slow down here.
Boy. Now, when you think about the orchestrations he does too, they're pretty complicated with constantly changing sections. So he's got to be working all the time. Because I don't think he just kind of like, just write that down in an afternoon or anything like
not
that.
all those arrangements. So of this recording, Stephen says, I recognize myself more in the music I've written for Catalyst. It's closer to my heart. It's very personal music about things that I care about. Now, interestingly, the co-founder of La Reserve Records, Matt Block, says This is a level of vulnerability that we haven't heard from Stephen yet. Each of his releases just keeps getting better and better. Well, I agree with the last part of that, but I don't agree about the vulnerability. This sounds really confident to me.
I didn't get vulnerability out of this. It doesn't sound like overly sensitive. It does sound very creative. The usual fountain of ideas that this guy is, really. Yeah. Also, what's with his thing with these scientific terms for his album titles, like catalyst, kinetic? They kind of sound like mechanical physics or something like that. He's describing
the energy involved, maybe. Anyway, let's go through the musicians here. Stephen Feifke on piano and all these great arrangements, of course. Bass, we've got Dan Chmielinsky. Drums, Brian Carter. Also, I believe we've got Jimmy McBride on drums on a tune. Guitar, Alex Wintz. The woodwinds, Andrew Gould, Alexa Tarantino, Lucas Pino, Sam Dillon, and Carl Maraghi. Trumpets, Max Darsh, John Lake, Benny Benack III, Gabe Med. Trombones, Rob Edwards, Jeffrey Miller, Javier Nero, who's got his own new release that came out. It's just fabulous Latin jazz recording. I hope we can get to it. And I should say Benny Benack's new recording just came out this week too, called Third Time's a Charm. So both those guys have their own records out newly this month. And also the final trombone, Jennifer Wharton. Recording engineer Roy Hendrickson, mixing by Brian Montgomery, and mastering engineer David Darlington.
Benny Benack, we should mention, was also on, they did a Christmas album together too, right? Stephen Feifke and Benny Benack, which is really good. Fun. Yeah, it had the dreidel song on it.
Yeah, the dreidel song too. Now, as Mike mentioned, Feifke's arrangements are really complex, and there's too many things going on to describe them all. You can just go on and on. So I'll just give you my impressions and highlights of each tune as I was going on, kind of play by play. I should say, though, that more than half of these tunes, the studio recordings are available on YouTube with the video. So if you want to see what's actually going on in the interaction with all the musicians, it's really, you can watch those on there too, and maybe give you some insight, into what instruments are being played and what's going on at the time. Anyway, we're going to start out with The Promised Land. And the drums beat in this intense, even beat tune. The trumpets scream right away. Wintz's guitar has prominent lines, and I hear bass clarinet in the reeds as well. Muted trumpets and woodwind lines intersect with more open brass lines. And before 2 minutes, a repeated undulating figure in the piano gets built upon with the band sections. There's an interesting section of flute and guitar lines before repeated pulsing rhythmic lines build the tension to around 3 minutes and 13 seconds. And a cool rising piano line from Feifke hangs, and he gets a solo over a throbbing bass and cymbal groove till the band builds up again. Pulsing rhythmic figures return with big drum build-ups from Brian Carter, who gets some solo spots in exchange with the horn lines. It builds back up with layers of horn lines and a cool lower syncopated line of trombone and bari sax. Feifke gets some more rhythmic piano near the end to interact with horns and screaming trumpets. The pulsing lines come again, getting Wintz's guitar involved too, to a big finish. Now we're going to get an old standard, Jimmy Van Hughes and Johnny Burke tune, It Could Happen to You. And the drums started out with a clicky modern kind of R&B beat twist with some bouncy piano and guitar riffs and muted trumpets to make an intro, bringing in Benny Benack's vocals. He has smooth, relaxed vocal lines that contrast over the jumpy beats and horn figures below. And then the feel switches up to swing with a big arranged horn transition into a piano solo from Feifke. It's swinging and happy sounding in his lines, and when Benack returns with more vocals, he's got a real bounce in his phrasing, and the sax section is working right in sync with his lines. It's a lot of fun, and he gets some great swooping lines in his vocalizations as well. The R&B groove returns for the final section and gets progressively funkier with some cool trombone rhythmic licks and guitar. Benack ends it with a big bluesy high note ending. Track 3 is a Benny Golson tune, Stablemates, and this has got powerful horn arrangements on here with lots of dynamic rhythmic change-ups between swing and Latiny feels. Chad Lefkowitz-Brown gets an energetic tenor solo going, and there are rock'em sock'em horn hits behind this boop-bop, 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 kind of slappy in one way and the other that are cool. Things settle into a steady swing for the rest of the solo over chugging bass. The horns build up behind. Feifke has a driving piano solo midway through the tune, quoting a little Charlie Parker on the way, and the horns build back up with more boop-bop, boop-bop lines. Brian Carter gets a drum break into a final build-up of the horn sections through the melody and some final switch-ups of the rhythm feel, and then Chad Lefkowitz-Brown getting some final blowing in at the end. A great, exciting arrangement.
There's something also about the brass where he'll kind of change somehow the arrangement, or they'll start playing in parallel or something, and he'll get this like sort of 1920s sort of mass sweet sound out of them, and then that'll change in the next section. It's pretty interesting.
He does have a lot of, even though his compositions and arrangements are very forward-reaching, he does have a lot of little retro elements. And
they'll come and then you'll be like, oh, this sounds like kind of like old school stuff, and then it'll just disappear. It's pretty amazing. So he'll go through different periods of jazz as well when he thinks about his arranging.
Harmonically, he'll have like little, in some of these tunes you can hear they'll go through little transitions where the harmony will change to some sort of modal idea just briefly and move through a little kind of segue. There's a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
Through all
blink and you'll miss it.
Yep. All right, track 4, Ali Dell'Angelo. This is like Wings of the Angels or something in Italian. Is that what that means?
Ali Dell'Angelo. Yeah, that's what it means.
Yeah.
I thought it was someone's name.
Oh, hey, Ali. Yeah. Didn't you go to school with her down in Staten Island? It starts out with a bass and piano left-hand rhythmic figure that gives it a feeling of skipping along. Saxes, muted trumpets, and trombones layer in. That bounce is carried on as lines are passed around, more in piano and then in deep bass trombone lines. It gets more of a driving swing feel with building horn lines and then softens again into an alto sax solo from Alexa Tarantino. She has good swing feel and hesitated rhythmic figures between speedier double-time licks, finishing up with some intervals of harmonic exploration. Feifke follows with a piano solo punctuated with horn jabs and a couple sets of descending figure ideas and triplets into percussive ideas to make a new forceful groove that bass and drums lock into. The horns build it up again with more lines from Tarantino and Feifke. It comes down quietly with some flute, trombone, and muted trumpets for a slowed down ending to match the beginning with a final phrase from Tarantino. Nice transformations through the course of this tune. We're going to get the title track, Stephen Feifke's original Catalyst. The drums beat this one in, and there's a cool low line with unison bass, bass clarinet, and guitar. Andrew Gould gets some leading lines on a sweet-sounding alto sax, as does John Lake on trumpet, in between full horn lines with a mix of muted trumpets. Lake gets more improvisation with a big warm trumpet tone. Woodwinds with clarinets and flute have new lines for backing, and Gould gets a fluttery, free-flying extended solo next over a funky drum beat from Carter. They pause it before Carter starts a new groove, and things build up with some stacked dissonances in piano and horns. The feel with that lower line idea from earlier returns with a big full band arrangement around lines from Gould and Lake as they get some simultaneous improvisation with a few pauses, but continued intensity to the end. Now, talk about retro vibes. We'll go way back. Tune, Johnny Green, Edward Hyman, I Cover the Waterfront. A great lush arrangement on this one to start it out. Flute, clarinet, bass clarinet, flugelhorns, but it builds tension, working to a sudden hit and pause before Martina da Silva starts her vocals. Her phrasing is good. Nice little embellishments. It's rubato and conducted by Feifke, getting into a relaxed, steady tempo from the I Cover the Waterfront lyric. There's some delicious scooping soft trombone lines mixed in with the other horn backing lines, and it builds to a great climax and a pause. Da Silva gets some raspy tension in her voice in spots as well. The arrangement really highlights her voice and phrasing, the band serving her, but then the band gets a chance to shine after the vocals finish with a great building arrangement and a final lush swell to the end. All right, another old jazz standard, Victor Young and Ned Washington's My Foolish Heart. But for this one, we're going to get a bossa nova treatment with some light and tasty opening piano from Feifke. A great woodwind arrangement to bring in the vocals from De Silva with fluttering flutes and bass clarinet, but she's trading off the vocals here with drummer Brian Carter now, who turns out to be quite a vocalist. The drums handled here by Jimmy McBride. Carter has a soulful and surprisingly high register voice. The arrangement gets a modulating lift into a silky alto solo from Alexa Tarantino over rhythmic chords from Feifke and lush woodwind lines, and the vocalists are back for more exchanges, male and female in the same register, and they work up to some nice harmonized lines and final exchanges with a last soft ending. Track 8, I believe this is a tune by Oscar Pettiford, Tricotism. Carter's drum brushes here bring in the horns on this to get things swinging into some improvised piano from Feifke. Woodwinds and brass have some rhythmic line exchanges to open things up for Dan Chmielinsky's bass to get some solo time, and then a cool unison section of bass, guitar, and piano. The full band has some swinging lines with fills from Carter and more piano from Feifke. A huge trumpet scream brings in a trombone solo from Jeffrey Miller, played with a lot of gusto. And then Chmielinsky is back for more bass soloing as the volume comes down. Very nice soft sax and trombone backing lines build up to trumpets shouting out, and Alex Wintz gets some guitar exchanges with Feifke as the horns give great swinging backing, and we hear some more of that bass, guitar, and piano line as the horn arrangement carries on, and some final bass from Chmielinsky to end it up. Track 9, Feifke's original Patience's Promise, or Patience's Promise, maybe. A lightly swinging waltz tune started out by the rhythm section and tasty piano fills. The horns come in softly under the solo line taken by Benny Bennick's trumpet. The horns build up nicely to bring Feifke back for some soloing with rapid lines, triplet ideas, and high-ringing notes, and playful trills, too. Bennick returns for an improvised solo with lyrical phrasing and some speedy double-time licks. The horn arrangement builds up more and more with sassy sax section lines set against the brass. It comes down with muted trumpets and soft figures over ringing bass before Bennick gets a final modal line to finish it up. And the final tune, Stephen Feifke's original Kingpin. It's an even beat tune with nicely layered horn lines over a clicky beat from Brian Carter. The syncopation and phrases give it an unclear feel of meter, but Carter settles the groove in with a clear click on beat 3 that begins with a searing solo on alto sax from Andrew Gould. The arrangement gets more sparse for him to continue on with waves of notes. There's some cool repeated ringing piano and trumpet backing parts. Then a little transition section with mysterious modal lines into a tenor sax solo from Lucas Pino. Carter has worked up the drums to a heavier beat now, and the longer phrased horn lines lock in as Pino works it up and then joins in with the horn arrangement. Things quiet down for a full band arrangement to build up again into a softer vamp section worked by Wintz's guitar and Feifke's piano that sets things up for Carter to work up a drum solo, and he takes his time to build this one up. And then from that, Wintz emerges with a guitar solo of his own with rapid picking and some very cool tasty double stop ideas as Carter continues on with the drum intensity. The band joins in on that vamping then, backing the guitar solo, and builds it up to a sudden, quiet and soft section that then slows to the end. So it's all here, great arrangements, making use of all the timbres of the instruments, flutes, clarinets, flugelhorns add lush variety. Feifke's piano and Wintz's guitar have prominent parts in all of the arranging as well. The interplay of the horn lines and skillfulness of the writing and arranging stands out. The tunes have variety with the common point of driving energy. The solos are well shared throughout the ensemble and exciting. You got Gould and Tarantino on alto sax, Pino's tenor sax, Bennick and Lake on trumpet, guitar, bass, solos, and of course Feifke's always skillful and creative piano work. And we get some vocal variety too, from Bennick's playfulness to Silva's nostalgic and tasty treatment, and Carter's high and soulful voice. A nice mix of Feifke's original compositions and different takes on standard tunes, and like that bossa feel added to My Foolish Heart. So Stephen, please keep these big band recordings coming. They're a lot of fun and give you lots of things to discover on every listen.
Yeah, I've liked everything I've heard from Stephen Feifke so far, and I think Kinetic was my favorite album until now. It's probably this one. This really kind of caught my attention a lot. What really caught my attention on this album, as I said, were the arrangements, which sometimes incorporate various styles as well as various eras of jazz in the same tune.
Right.
Pretty amazing. Feifke's very inventive as an arranger. And there's often a lot of humor in his arrangements too, which I always love to hear. There's a lot of those sort of brass, like, wow, kind of like just screams, and there's these kind of like, bam, kind of like sounds. So I just really love that.
What I like too is you often get arrangements that will have the different sections, doing different things and playing, but he'll often have like the brass divided with some of the trumpets doing something and some of them doing others. And there's a variety of mutes interacting at the same time. There's really all these different blends and lines of motion going on at once. So
just my whole love of orchestral timbre and things. So when people really pay attention to that, it's great. Even in jazz, I just love it. I was kind of overwhelmed by all that I heard on this album. This is one of those albums where, sometimes we'll do this in like classical music too, where you just can't absorb it in a week. You just want more time to do it, so I couldn't really, I'm going to have to hear this again. There's a lot of variety of approaches, not just in the arrangements, but the solos as well. Some are solos, some are taken as like duets or, question and response kind of sort of phrasing from the, from two different musicians. The whole album just overflows with creative ideas. One issue I'm having, though, is I haven't found a CD of this. It looks like on his website he's got it as part of a bundle for $27.99, which is a lot, especially if you live in Japan. It's like that times 1.5 or something, But I just hope this is kind of come out as a regular CD. So
I don't think we can get it yet
put that out
on CD here, but
I haven't seen it on Amazon though or anything. So
no, I looked. It's not available yet. So
I hope it's going to come out though, because he had the Roll of the Rhythm section last year,
right,
and that never came out on a CD either. I don't think. I would have liked to have had that one too. Yeah. But anyway, I do have Kinetic on a CD, so that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, if he keeps up this rate of productivity, there'll be a lot more recordings to talk about in a short period of time. So I really like that he's doing these large ensembles. Seems to be leading a real renaissance in big band stuff. So that's great.
Yeah, he's unique too, because there are other big bands. We talk about we think about like the different styles of big bands. They kind of made the two ends, like Wynton Marsalis would be like at the more traditional conservative end, and then Maria Schneider would be kind of at the really sort of not avant-garde but experimental, like really reaching out kind of end. And then there's a lot of other stuff too, and he's really unique on his own.
Yeah. Anyway, check it out. It's the one word you can use to wrap it all up is very exciting. So
yeah, it's an exciting record. Yeah, I just love the whole sound of it all. Yeah, I want that coming through the big speakers, like all over my body. It's going to be great.
Well, there you have it. There's episode 121.
We're back, baby.
Transmusical experience.
Is that what we're going to call the episode? Transmusical? So. Yeah, just transmusical. Transmusical experience. Maybe just call it a transmusical experience. What do you think?
We could do that.
Yeah, that sounds good.
A transmusical experience. Okay, go with that.
That's good.
Write that down so I don't forget it.
You heard it right here. Creativity right in front of you, people. We just came up with the title.
There you go.
For the we were talking about it before the episode, and then we just couldn't think of something, and now there it is.
Yeah, sometimes the program lends itself early to a good title, and sometimes it doesn't. And
sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we just never come up with one, so we just say, let's do that one. I feel like doing a podcast is like baseball. You play poorly one day, you're going to play again tomorrow. So, it's not like we're putting out an album and it's going to have to last forever. It's just like, next week we'll come up with a better one.
And next week we have a theme already. We're going to go guitar again.
We're going guitar again.
Guitar recordings. So
we got guitar next week, and then I think we have a piano the week after.
Right.
Because there's that great, we haven't heard it yet, but I'm sure it's great, Keith Jarrett recording.
Oh, I heard it. I've already been listening to it.
Of a CPE Bach, who we really love. I mean, how could we not talk about that?
Yeah, we got to talk about it.
Yeah,
even though it was recorded a long time ago.
1994. Yeah. 30 years ago. Almost 30 years ago. How was it? Was it good?
I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah.
I'm sure I will too. I haven't heard it yet, but okay. I'm going to get to it, though.
If you want to find out what those recordings are, shortly after this episode is released, I'll have that playlist up on Deezer. You can find it there. And there'll also be a link to it on our Facebook page. So if you want to start listening early, please do that. And as always, thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. Catches your eye, brings in new people wondering what that is. And sometimes our titles will either do that or turn people away. We'll see what happens every week with the titles. So any final thoughts there, Mike?
No, not really. I'm just kind of looking at next week's. I've got some pretty interesting classical guitar stuff. It's a little different than what I usually come up with. And some new composers you've never heard of. And I know you haven't because I haven't either.
Okay. I've got a bit of a mix-up. I've got a duo and then I think a quintet. And we're going to hear what might be the last recording made by Joey DeFrancisco on organ, too, with... a 96-year-old guitarist. So,
wow.
Yeah, be inspirational.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, all that coming up next week, episode 122. So until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next week.
Same difference. Two jazz fans, one jazz standard. A review of a single jazz standard through music, history, and stories. And this is AJ.
And this is Johnny.
If you are a jazz fan and you like jazz standards, bebop, show tunes, ballads, you name it.
Yeah, we've got them here. We drop a new show on you every other week, and we take a standard and we listen to a few different versions of it.
Same difference.
Come join the fun.
Looking forward to seeing you.